Kia ora. Great to see a packed gallery here this morning, so welcome everybody. Te kina te rangi, te kina te hou, te kina te moanga, te kina te awa, te kina te moana, te kina te whae o te ao, te kina papatuanuku, homie, hui,
Tahe kia. Can I firstly acknowledge our youth councillors that have joined us this morning, and welcome to our deliberations. I would like to sadly note an apology from Councillor Skinner, who has had a bereavement overnight and will not be present this morning. I'm sure councillors would want us to express our condolences to Councillor Skinner and his family. Can I also note that Councillor Matthew Benge is unwell and has apologised. Councillor Pete Rainey is in Dunedin supporting the Nelson Pipe Band, I think, brass band. He would take offence at being assumed with the Scottish, but he is joining us on Zoom, and I'm assuming you're all there and connected, Pete.
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, and good to have you joining us this morning.
Thank you.
In opening this morning, there are just two acknowledgements I'd like to make. Councillor Courtney.
I'm happy to move the acceptance of those.
Oh, apologies, yeah. Of course. Thank you for keeping me on the ball, Councillor Courtney.
Right.
Moved by Councillor Courtney, seconded by Councillor Brand, I think. Appreciate that, and put that those apologies be accepted. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
I'd now like to just make two acknowledgements. Firstly, I think this community owes a huge thank you to the team behind Te Ramaroa. The trust ably led by Annette Milligan and the artistic director, Michaela Blackman, and the 40 artists, in my view, did a superb job of that event for our city over the last week. And I also want to acknowledge the support of council staff in helping bring that spectacle together. To me, the feature on TVNZ 7 Sharp in presenting Nelson as creative, as family friendly, as fun, was just a wonderful way in which to present our city. And I'd like the council to collectively note our thanks in that regard. The second acknowledgement I wanted to make was that on Tuesday, the council received a $600,000 dividend from the Nelson Airport Company. This is the largest dividend that this community has received from the airport. A decade ago, it was only $250,000. It's a positive note that reflects the recovery of the visitor industry after COVID, but it's also a real credit to the board and to the chief executive and management of the port company. The importance of those dividends is a real challenge for our council, is to keep the rates, pressure and costs of households, and as a consequence of having successful trading businesses like Nelson Airport that can assist with rates. This will be the last time the council receives an individual dividend from the port company with the establishment of the holding company, but it will be necessary going on into the future for our trading companies to produce good results like that, for us to be able to maintain rates for our community. So I just simply note those two developments. I'd like to confirm the order of business for today, unless there's any objection to that. Are there any specific interests that any of our elected members would want to declare? Councillor Sansom.
I've got a very small interest in relation to an item in the confidential agenda, so shall I just raise it then?
I would like you to raise it at the time of the confidential business. Yeah. Or awesome. Thank you for notifying me there, and I'll make sure that's drawn to our attention. Councillor Hodgson.
Just regarding the Community Investment Fund, I am a trustee for an organisation that received a grant from that fund this year.
So what we should do is just note that in, and on that specific item, my advice would be for you not to participate in any comment on that particular grant from council. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, my interests are similar to I forgot your name.
James.
Thanks, Matty.
I love it when I just love it, Matty, when it happens to people that are younger than me. So you've got an interest in one of the other entities that has received a grant.
Correct.
That's good as gold. We'll just note that on the item as it comes up, and the same rules apply, and that is you should refrain from discussing that particular grant from the Nelson City Council. We now come to the item of public forum, and I would like to invite Graham O'Brien before the committee to make his presentation in our public forum section. Welcome, Graham. You know the gig. You've been here before. Welcome, and we're pleased to hear your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm here to speak about the Kiangora development at 125 Waimea Road. I'm an affected resident and I represent others. The reason I'm at the public forum today is there's literally no other avenue for the residents to have their say, let alone any chance having their concerns heard and addressed before the consents have been stamped and work started. The only option, according to the Mayor, if I have a problem, is to go to the Environment Court. And you know what happened to the last person that took the council to the Environment Court. Does that seem right to you, to have no voice? I mean, what do you call a style of government where people have no choice, have no voice? The residents and many in the wider community rightly have concerns about this type of building, the limited demographic of people that it is designed for, the impact on privacy, the noise issues, the processes for dealing with complaints, and the ongoing management of such a facility, with good justification going by KO's track record managing difficult tenants, as you can see by the headlines. And any lack of evidence that these will be positive places in the future. I mean, I'd like to see some evidence of how these buildings end up in 10 or 20 years, and I don't think you'll be able to find any. I just have a bit to say about the resource consent. The resource consent says, in summary, the proposal will result in residential use of the site. It is entirely residential in nature, and we disagree that the proposed activity is similar in nature to the previous environment. Apart from actually just sleeping, it's completely different to what was there before. If this was just a usual residential site like the others, mixed housing, 1 or 2 level houses, people accept this as their social responsibility. No one said they don't want it there. Everyone agrees we need more housing. But buildings are another whole issue, and there's a huge impact on the people and the community. Some of the information I've been told, and some of what has been verified by KO, I was told there will be staff on site 6% of their working hours, and that some courses will be run on site. In writing, what was verified was the team will have started to draft a high-level plan. Any details may change, so there was no verification there. But they will have an office on site. But regarding the activities, KO confirms the community room will be activated in a variety of ways, may include events, activities, services may run workshops or clinics from the space. However, they do make a point that permanent services won't be located on site, which is a pity because someone at night would be good. And some activities or arrangements may not be able to be shared publicly. Now, this does not sound like just residential activities at this address. In fact, this sounds more like a facility for KO and other services to conduct their business. And it's starting to sound a bit more like a social experiment on what we can do. So if that's the case, we should be talking about this. Some of the other information on this building from the resource consent planner says, I did view it a potential oversight in which consistency with the DO 13A accessibility may be questioned. You can, in the headlines, there's something about KO not meeting the standards. The proposed building is well beyond the maximum height permitted in the residential zone. And the proposed 3-story apartment does show that it is aligned with the direction of the wider public and council. Well, really, if I go out on the street and I ask 100 people if they thought 3- and 6-story social housing buildings were a good idea in Nelson, and if they would want one next to them, what do you think the vast majority of the wider public would say? And do you care, is my question. Some other information I think is relevant to this conversation. There are 260 people in Nelson needing a house. However, there are 1,000 in the top of the south, and that's down to Hokitika. If any of those people have a legitimate reason to come to Nelson and are higher on the housing register, they will be eligible for these houses as well. This is from KO at the drop-in session. And this, I feel, is similar to what happened in Rotorua with the emergency housing. So also, there are a lot of houses being built, right? So we don't actually know how many. There's a lot of rumours and speculation. There's very little that can be verified. I'd like to just talk quickly about, the people that are involved. I mean, while you're out there getting photos and good PR and patting yourselves on the back, there's people out there that are really stressed and very, very worried, and with good reason, as you can see, and as we've seen on TV. Have you been to those people and really told them that you're going to support them? Because when I asked KO what they were going to do about the noise complaints after we saw the 10,000 complaints in the last 14 months, they said nothing different. They said, if there's noise, ring council. If you've got other problems, call the police. Well, I don't think it's good enough. That's a social responsibility. The people take the social responsibility. Council has a social responsibility. And KO has a social responsibility to manage these difficult tenants properly. Now, we're going on a worst case scenario, but we should be planning for the worst and hoping for the best, and then we'll be all right. We don't want to see these kind of headlines in Nelson. If you say ring the police, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, the police are busy. Right, we know that. If you've got a noise control officer turn up and he's not feeling safe and he wants to ring the police, they're not coming, and they're not coming in a hurry. Let's be realistic about this. So what can council do, because KO's not doing anything, what can council do to really give confidence to the residents who are severely impacted by this? We're talking 3 stories. Some people lose complete privacy of their house. There's one here, I mean, you can't see it, but the whole boundary, there's 3 people on those boundaries. They've got no privacy in any of their houses now, right? Looking into the back windows. So I think it's wrong. 3 stories. You show me a good example of where this works anywhere in the world, 10 years, 20 years, and maybe you've got an argument, but I don't think you can. I couldn't find anything. So I don't know how am I going for time.
Happy if you're finished to take questions from colleagues. If you've concluded,
if you've got questions, I'm happy to take them. If you haven't, I'll carry on until my time runs out.
I certainly would like to clarify for you.
Sure.
And that is that the law says that the council must treat Kāinga Ora or any person applying to build housing exactly the same. That is the law, except obviously the council has substantively more say where we own the land, which is the case with respect to not the development you've drawn to our attention, but later on our agenda, we're dealing with a case like on Bridge Street and Achilles, where we are the landowner, we have a lot more control.
Okay.
My second point that I'd make to yourself is that our council is planning big changes in the rules around housing developments for all developers. We'll be going out to public consultation in the next 2 months on the biggest changes in our Nelson Resource Management Plan in 30 years, and would really invite you as a submitter on those rules.
Well, it's a bit late,
because I think your frustration is actually the council staff are required to administer the rules that have gone through the resource process, and they are. Your frustration is that the rules allow developments of that sort, and the proper place to have that conversation is when the council consults on those rules.
Sure. But I mean, you put through in 2022 some plan changes that allow these 3 to 6 story buildings through. So you're talking about these are all being done and dusted, all these developments now. And we're not talking about, like I say, the usual residential. We're talking about these buildings, right? And by the way, these buildings, that's $7.5 million. That's $600,000 for a 1-bedroom unit in a building. I mean, it seems ridiculous, right?
Happy to be a little bit. If there's any other councillors that have got any questions or comments from Graham. Councillor Sanson.
Thank you,
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through this year. Kia ora, Graham, thanks for your forum. Yeah, I think as chair of the Community Housing Acceleration Task Force, I feel, some responsibility just to
You should
speak to the housing need in our community and housing insecurity. And, you know, I think I hear your concerns and I have some sympathy with, you know, I guess, your concerns around intensification, but I also think that, you know, as a country and for us, certainly as a community, times have changed and we just have to adapt to be able to provide housing for families.
Sure. Well, this isn't a housing for family, right? It's not housing for family. That's what we're saying. It's okay, housing for families. Everyone agrees, like everybody agrees. These are single rooms, walk-ups only for those that have no mobility, but for the fit and young. And like I point out,
Graham,
they're running services there.
Can I just ask you, let Rachel finish your point and then I'll give you the opportunity to respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I use the word families broadly to mean people who need a home. So,
Well, families are families, right?
sure. And I guess I also have some concern about a few problem tenants for Kainga Ora.
Yeah.
You know, kind of stigmatizing people who need housing.
Sure.
So I just think I would hope that as a community, Nelson would be a place that actually tries to ensure there's a home for everybody and that we're supportive of those who are, you know, experiencing housing insecurity or poverty. So, yeah, I guess we've had a presentation recently from Kainga Ora and they're really trying to ensure they're providing quality, you know, well-insulated, safe, healthy homes for all kinds of people in our community. And it can, you know, could be elderly on the lower floor, for example, you know, just to give a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's all great. And I've heard all that before. But as you can see, they're not managing difficult tenants. And it's it's only 10% of the KO's clients that are difficult, they say. 90% of the problems are noise and traffic issues and the amount of traffic. So you can see that by that. And if you look online, you know, 4 years people have suffered. I mean, it's all right saying you're going to provide good social housing, that's fine. But you also have to provide it so that there's a social responsibility for everybody. That includes the people that are in these houses, that includes Kainga Ora, and that includes council. So it's no use saying that the community has to be open and accepting. They are, but what they're not open and accepting to is having the quality of their life downgraded because some people refuse to comply by their social responsibility. And that's it. I mean, if you can tell me KO is going to do something different than what they've done in the last 18 months where they haven't acted on 10,000 complaints, everyone will be happy.
Councillor, look, we have gone over time, but want to allow the discussion. So I'll have a last question from Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you through the Mayor. Not a question, just a comment. Graham, thanks for bringing your lens to this. It's food for thought and it's important that the residents get a say, and it sounds like there's a little bit of work to be done in regards to KO consultation. Thanks.
No worries.
Thank you. Thank you again, Graham, for your presentation.
It's not a consultation, it's a drop-in session. So.
All right. I'd now like to invite the Clean Water Coalition on fluoridation of Darren Longley and Zoe Bryan. We've set aside 10 minutes for your presentation. It's up to you as to how much time you would like for questions and discussion. We're all ears.
Good morning, all. Morena Tato, and welcome to the public who have joined us this morning as well. Mayor Nick and councillors, we appreciate the opportunity to present to you this morning. As introduced, I'm Darren Longley. And
I'm Zoe Byrne.
we are speaking this morning on behalf of Nelson Clean Water Coalition. And most of you have met with us before and are well aware of the issues that we've raised with you individually. What we'll cover today in our presentation is on screen, a brief description of who we are as the Clean Water Coalition in Nelson, what the latest scientific evidence is showing us about fluoride, the importance of it respecting individual choice, and what actions the City Council can take that we recommend to you. We represent a rising number of over 300 members currently, all of whom are residents and ratepayers who are deeply concerned about this council's potential proposal to fluoridate our water without consulting residents and without our agreement. Zoe will now present the most recent evidence showing why fluoridation of our water should not proceed.
Hello. So the policy of water fluoridation has been put in place with the stated goal of reducing dental decay in children's teeth. The effectiveness of drinking fluoride is highly dubious, to say the least. When New Zealand dental statistics are reviewed, as they show no meaningful difference in decay between fluoridated and unfluoridated areas of New Zealand. Looking at this graph as an example, percentage of 5-year-olds with no dental decay 2001 to 2020. Some years fluoridated areas are slightly better, others unfluoridated areas are slightly better, and many there's no meaningful difference between fluoridated and unfluoridated areas. Furthermore, when Ashburton stopped fluoridation in 2002 and New Plymouth stopped in 2011, there was no corresponding increase in tooth decay. But the real question is, why would you want something to be promoted that may possibly not really help your teeth if it is incredibly toxic? As examples, Green 2019 until 2020 are high-quality Canadian studies which found that there are significant losses of IQ in children caused by consuming fluoride. Canada's highest level of water fluoridation is 0.7 parts per million, while New Zealand's range is 0.7 to 1.0 parts per million. If there is a level low enough to not cause harm, it's clearly well below the level New Zealand plans to use. Goodman 2022 found that iodine deficiency in the mother, which is common in New Zealand, increased fluoride's toxic effects on the baby's brain. New Zealand study, Kangaratham 2009, found children who lived continuously in fluoridated areas were over 4 times more likely to have dental fluorosis than children who lived continuously in non-fluoridated areas. Earlier this year, one of the US government's top scientific projects was released. The National Toxicology Program has recently completed a 6-year, multi-million-dollar review on fluoride and neurotoxicity. They have confirmed that fluoride lowers children's IQ and that there is no known safe level where fluoride does not cause harm. The NTP reported that 52 of 55 studies found decreases in child IQ associated with an increase in fluoride, a 95% consistency. The average IQ loss would be 3 to 5 IQ points in the range Nelson will be fluoridated with. The NTP stated that, for example, a 5-point decrease in the population's IQ would nearly double the number of people classified as intellectually disabled. This is summarized by this graph showing a steep decline in IQ as fluoride increases. 50 to 60% of fluoride is excreted by healthy kidneys, and the rest accumulates in bones and soft tissues, especially the kidneys and the pineal gland. The National Research Council has found that dosages as low as 0.05 to 0.13 milligrams per kilogram per day damage the thyroid even when iodine intake is adequate. Reduction of thyroid function can lead to loss of mental acuity, depression, weight gain, and affect brain development. Fluoride is also linked to increased fractures and some types of bone cancer. Fluoridation chemicals are hazardous emissions captured unprocessed from smokestacks scrubbers of the phosphate fertilizer industry. There are only 2 places this toxic sludge is allowed to be dispersed: in designated hazardous waste facilities or alternatively into our drinking water. Unsurprisingly, this will not be a natural form of fluoride like calcium fluoride. That would still be toxic, but corrosive hydrofluorosilicic acid is much more toxic and often is also contaminated with other toxins such as lead, arsenic, mercury, and sometimes radioactive uranium.
There are 6 core reasons why we believe that the City Council should strongly reject the mandate to fluoridate our water. Following on screen, the first one is that there is no individual adjustment of dose. Does a 2-year-old and a 50-year-old adult need the same dose? Secondly, there is no process provided for informed medical consent. No competent doctor would ever prescribe a drug without prior examination of the patient. They would never advise that they drink as much as they like. They would never prescribe the same dose for the young, the old, the sick, the well, or even those with dentures. They would never propose continuing consuming it forever. This completely overrides all medical ethics. The third point is that compulsory fluoridation overrides individual choice and those medical ethics. Local decision-making is once again being overridden by a central government mandate. We've seen this before. Most other countries do not fluoridate. 98% of Europe doesn't, and many other countries we could cite. We're all aware historically of the impact of lead, asbestos, tobacco, DDT, mercury, and other so-called safe things that were once promoted as safe. Will you as a council ignore this large body of evidence now about fluoride's toxicity, as New Zealand did with lead? We hope not. There are real human consequences for any decision you make about this. As we're aware from the NCP report, children and pregnant women are the most vulnerable. Many people with health conditions, and some are in this audience, thyroid conditions, kidney issues, and suffer diabetes will be disproportionately impacted. The economically disadvantaged will not be able to afford the very expensive filters required. Businesses and livelihoods will be severely affected. 2 local examples are a biofertilizer factory and a cider vinegar manufacturer who would be required to install extremely expensive filtration plants that may cause them to leave Nelson and potentially affect their long-term business viability. What about all the cafes, restaurants, and other businesses that depend on clean, untainted water? There are 5 ways that you, our council, can act. Firstly, you may use the excuse that government has mandated it, therefore there's nothing we can do. But we say that we and you are not their servants who must obey regardless of the consequences. The first point we believe you can act on, that New Health New Zealand currently has a lawsuit against the government's water fluoridation policy. The City Council should join with it and get an emergency injunction. Secondly, you could reach out to other councils with concerned constituents like those gathered today who reject fluoride being added to their water supplies, which overrides local decision-making. The Grey District Council has deferred their decision on it because the Mayor said they felt it was appropriate to consult with residents and ratepayers. Is that not also extremely appropriate right here in Nelson? The Bay of Plenty Council is also seeking an exemption. The third point is, Mayor Nick, your suggestion to request a judicial review of the Director General of Health's mandate to fluoridate city water supplies. The CEO and excuse the numbering on screen. The CEO and Mayor could also write to the government to protest this anti-democratic policy and oppose fluoride being added to our water, or propose funding fluoride tablets for those who actually want it. You could promote the school toothbrushing campaign like Scotland's Child Smile program, which produced excellent results for children's dental health. Lastly, there are 3 core questions that certainly need answering by yourselves. How will you as councillors respect the rights and wishes of us, ratepayers and residents who do not want to be forced to consume fluoride in our water. That is what is being proposed. Secondly, if you choose to comply with this government's mandate, this government, how will you respond to the rising public resistance evident today and its effect on council reputation as upholders of community well-being, which you are charged to uphold? And lastly, what legal liability are you each willing to take for the serious long-term consequences in our community of deciding to agree to fluoridate our water? We are seriously asking each of you and council as a whole to walk the talk of engaging with the public as per your own significance and engagement policy, to consult with us about fluoridation of our water. You need to know that we will not accept the compulsory medication of our water. We will continue to uphold our right to choose. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. We would welcome questions if you'd like to ask any.
Sure, and I'll set that. There is only two lawful ways by which this council does not proceed with fluoridation, and that is that a group like such as yourselves test the evidence of the Director General's decision that requires us to do so, and that is the opportunity for you to test in a court of law the claims that you have made this morning, or alternatively, we've got a general election in 3 months' time. Parliament is elected. Parliament has passed the law that requires us to do so. And the way in which a democratic country changes the law is that you elect parliamentarians. Well, look, we are elected representatives. We sign and swear an oath on taking office to comply by the law of the land. They are the only two lawful ways in which fluoridation would not proceed.
If I can...
Why is it not reasonable then for one of those two actions is the right place for you to go?
Mayor Nick.
I'm sorry, we will accept order. My question is one, aren't they the only two lawful ways?
We do not believe so. Mayor Nick, with respect to your response, we represent local residents.
And I don't deny that. I'm just saying.
Your significance and engagement policy states that you must consult with the community on significant assets. The number one asset is our water supply. Now, you're also under the Local Government Community Amendment Wellbeing Act. There are 4 areas in which you are charged to restore the well-being of our community. Is this not certainly a number one priority? And yes, we've heard what you've said about the democratic process. The reason that we are here today en masse is because we do not see a democratic process being respected by the government in the first place. It is therefore why we are asking each of you to seriously look at this evidence, not just to accept what the mainstream belief has been promoted for years, that yes, fluoride will help dental decay. It does not.
Why do you say?
And the evidence clearly shows the latest one, which we would suggest you are not up to speed with, and neither is the dental community, that needs to be addressed.
Why do you think Parliament's Health Select Committee, why do you think that Parliament's Health Select Committee, after considering this issue for 18 months, hearing 1,000 submissions, including the information that you have come today, unanimously came to the view
Mayor Nick, thank you.
It seems plain that the people
Thank you
with
for
you
the
don't wish
question.
to have a discussion with you.
Yeah.
And so I think we're over time and conclude
Sure.
the discussion.
We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. We ask you again to seriously look at this latest evidence. That supersedes the evidence that was presented to those groups you've cited. That needs to be acknowledged very seriously. This issue is not going away, and you need to be well aware of it. Thank you.
Thanks for your submission.
Thank you.
We'll move to the next item of the agenda. The next item on our agenda is the minutes of the 6th June and 22nd of June that have been circulated.
Happy to move. I'll second that, Mayor Nick.
We'll just allow take a brief adjournment while we allow our public members to depart. those minutes of the meeting of firstly 8 June. We'll take them together, 8 June as well as 22nd of June. Is there any colleagues that want to raise any issues from those 2 minutes? That being the case, I'll put the adoption of those. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And to the contrary, no. Carried. We come to item 6 on the agenda is the Mayor's report. I'd just like to give the explanation to Council about how we'll work through, because there's quite a lot of varied items, and I think it's more helpful for us to discuss one conversation at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move and seek a seconder for the Mayor's report in total. Then what I'd like to do is to have a discussion on each of the items, starting at item 2, because item 1 is just a pro forma. And then depending on the resolutions, if there is a discussion and differences of view, to potentially take each of those items by a separate vote. But is there a colleague that's prepared to second the Mayor's report?
I'm happy to do that.
So we'll take a seconder of the Mayor's report. The first item that I would like to open to discussion is Resolution 2. This is a consequence of the Kāinga Ora development on Achilles Avenue and Rutherford Street. My concern is that, particularly with the deterioration in the overall building investment and particularly the apartment market, that without some flexibility, the risk for council is that this housing development does not proceed at all. And so my recommendation to council is that we indicate in the process where Kāinga Ora goes out to the market that we have some flexibility about including a share of market housing. Now, it is my view that in Kāinga Ora's assessment process, that they'll be looking for the best possible development with maximising the community benefits. And that is a process that they will go through in the formal tender process. In the event that there is a variation of the criteria that our council set down when it agreed to the development last September, then if there is a significant variation from that agreement, then we would need to go and consider whether a further public consultation was required, or we're doing at this stage of the process saying we're really keen to get investment and we want to give Kāinga Ora the best chance possible of securing a good private sector partner to enable it to proceed. The last point I'd make on this is that I am concerned when I read the reports that over the last year, there was 10 times the level of investment in Tasman District as compared with Nelson. And collectively as a council, I want us to be working hard to attract investment to our city. And whether that investment is private sector, whether it's public sector, yes, I want it to be good quality, but most of all, the city needs investment. And so the reason for this recommendation is giving our community the best prospect of being able to get a project. If we're looking at a 175 house apartment complex, in rough terms, we're looking at an order of investment of $140, $150 million in our city. That is going to be a big ask. We need to make the tender process as attractive as possible for a commercial partner to go into with Kāinga Ora and ultimately with council. Welcome comments from colleagues. Chair of the Housing Task Force, Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, I've got a comment. I don't have a question, but thanks for bringing this forwards through your Mayor's report. And I think I take some heart from the interest that Kāinga Ora did have in the possibility of this development through their initial kind of soft approach and to specific potential development partners and acknowledge that this is now the next step, and them being able to go out and do publicly notified or request for publicly notified proposals, and also that there was some discussion around, key worker housing and that kind of thing. So I think it's appropriate that we're broadening the potential housing unit types within the development, with things like the hospital rebuild happening. We know there's a lot of businesses in the community who are struggling to recruit because they can't get accommodation for their staff. So I think it's, hopefully going to be a positive move, and hopefully we'll get, good interest and a good partner. Thanks.
Share that ambition. The Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just very briefly, Nelson needs more houses. If we can get more, that is a very, very good thing. And in this case, this has been made relatively clear that this is going to be one of the best avenues we have to actually see the delivery of a significant housing development within our city centre, delivering to numerous outcomes that council has adopted in terms of intensification, in terms of providing a mix of housing types, and particularly delivering on much needed social housing in this region. And so I'm really hoping that through this tender process, we'll be able to find a well-suited partner for Kāinga Ora to deliver to those outcomes and to address what is an incredibly pressing need in this region.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I've got a comment from Councillor Pete Rainey.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. I do think it's worth pointing out, I do take on board your comment that the level of building is 10 times higher out in Tasman. However, I do see that this is a very exciting possibility because we're going to be heading up, not out, and I think that the possibility of including some market housing is going to make this a more attractive proposition. So I see this as a bit of a corner that we're turning here in Nelson City. I do hope this gets across the line, and I fully support this move to try and make it more attractive to developers. So thanks for bringing this up. Cheers.
Thanks, Councillor Rainey. We note your white bait background, and we're counting on you bringing some home for us. Any other comments from colleagues? Can I just simply conclude by saying thank you for council support. I remain nervous as to whether we are going to be able to get a partner to deliver this. But as a consequence of this resolution, my view is that we are giving it our very best shot. I'd now like to come to item 2.4 in my Mayor's report. That is with respect to the letters I've received from both Tasman and Marlborough, confirming their contributions each of $20,000 to the Kotahitanga Moti Teo Alliance. I would make this comment with respect to it. We had a substantive discussion around this council table whether we should make our funding of $20,000 conditional on it. And a number of councillors around the table persuaded us better than sort of hold a gun to your head approach is actually take the punt, put the 20,000 out there and ask our two neighbouring councils to come on board. In my view, it is a really positive sign of our relationship with our two neighbouring councils that approach has proved successful, and this is a significant shot in the arm of this conservation project. And I particularly acknowledge as the councillors that persuaded me that was the better approach and proved successful. The next item, is there anybody that wishes to add any comment? The Chief Executive has raised me just a preference as to whether councillors would prefer to vote on each section as we move through. I'm going to take his advice. I think that would be more efficient. Can I suggest that I put the vote specifically on the recommendations on the Kāinga Ora development and ask those, it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Courtney, for those in favour to say aye.
Aye.
Those to the contrary say no. And let us now debate the noting reference to the Taiho Alliance funding. I've just made some comments. Is there any further comments that colleagues would like to make? Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, I think I applaud the approach we took. And I think it's also a vote of confidence, or a sign of confidence from the other councils in the Kotahitanga Mō Te Taiao Alliance and the outcomes they've been able to deliver to date. So I think that this is just a really hugely important thing for our, initiative for our region. One that is, receiving international attention and acknowledgement for its approach and effectiveness.
Thanks, Councillor Sansom. I'm going to put the resolution with respect to note 3 in the MEAS report. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, say no. We then come to item 4 in the MEAS report, which is my submission on the Water Services Entities Amendment Bill. I do want to make plain to council colleagues that the process was very unsatisfactory in the sense that the bill was introduced to the House, submissions closed, and submissions were held yesterday in such a short period that it was impossible to be able to have either staff or councillors involved. It is my view that the issue of the Three Waters reform is absolutely huge for this council, as it is for others, and that for us to be completely absent of a voice would have been to not be real about the significance of the Three Waters reforms on our council and community. I made plain in the submission that in the time frame that was given, it was not possible to include staff and councillor input. The key areas of which I have raised concern is firstly simply about the rush of legislation. I do believe that the original legislation was rushed, passed under urgency, was found to have mistakes, and you're almost putting error on top of error then when you're trying to then fix it either at a faster pace. The second key concern I have is that I welcome the shift from the 10 4 water entities to the 10. But if you're going to only have 3 councils involved in entity H, then the double governance structure of having the regional representative group as well as the directors doubles up on the bureaucracy and reduces the accountability. And then the third issue that I do have real concerns about that does impact on Nelson is respect to the issue of the boundaries on the southern end. It affects us because if it compromises the effectiveness of the overall entity that we are part of, then we are part of that. And there's also an issue of which my colleague next door, Mayor King, feels very strongly about, and that is it seems that the government keeps determining different boundaries to the regions that really does make effective governance overall, whether it be for the Conservation Board, Whātai Ora or others. The more we can get consistency in those boundaries, the more effectively we can provide governance for the communities across the top of the South. That is the background to the submission. I'm happy to take questions or comments. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Minik. Yeah, it's unfortunate it was such a short time frame, but I do wonder, we did establish task forces in order that they can be agile and meet at short notice and consider issues as they arise. And we do have a local government reform task force that I'm on. I enjoy the work that we did have on that task force. Could we have convened that task force over just a couple of days' notice and considered this submission? Would that have been possible?
Yes, it could, except for 2 points. The most important thing with those task forces is that we get the input from staff. The chief executive and the infrastructure manager indicated that there just simply was not the time for staff to be able to provide any advice for that task force. And the second thing was those task forces are constrained and can't make decisions. So even at the end of that, it could be no more than a mayoral submission. there wouldn't be the power for the task force to be able to do that. So look, that was a possible approach. I had to tell you, I spent up to midnight trying to knock something together. I do think when Parliament is dealing with issues that affect councils, providing less than a week for submissions to be lodged is totally unreasonable. It needs to be at least a month, so there's the time for staff to consider, councillors to consider the advice from staff, and then to make a considered submission. A key point of my submission, and I mean this quite genuinely, and the public will make a decision about who they want to be the government after October. My honest view is that I would really welcome, and strongly said in my submission, let the bill lie on the table, let the election occur, let the new Parliament consider the bill, and that would give ample time for all councillors and council staff to have input into what is critically important legislation that's going to affect the management of our water infrastructure for decades. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just a question in terms of the submission aspect around the regional representation groups is just in considering the submission and then writing the submission, did you consider just those aspects around balance sheet separation? I know that that's been a continued sort of hot point in terms of how those arrangements are made.
My view remains the same, and that is the right structure for any water entity. And obviously the preference this council has indicated is for Nelson Marlborough Tasman, is for it to be exactly like the port company and the airport and a council-controlled organisation. I indicated that in my previous submission. It was not an issue that was specifically dealt with in the bill, but would be happy to take if that remains the council's position as this reform moves forward. My honest view is that even if there is regardless of where the election lands, it is likely there will be a change of government in at least the sense of the change of the coalition arrangements. And I think it would be wise for the group that Aaron raised, the Task Force on Local Government Reform, to meet as quickly as possible after the general election, when we know the lie of the land, to get clarity of our position going forward on this massive reform. And I think that would be a good way forward. Councillor Courtney.
Thanks, Nick. I did notice I've got two questions, and I'll try, in the interest of saving time, to wrap them together. But I did notice in your submission that you did push strongly in support of Tasman Marlborough over the southern boundary issues. So look, I need to know who's supporting who here. So in our quest, that's the council's quest to save NELMAC, did we get any support at all from Marlborough District Council, for example, or Tasman District Council? And then I didn't think I'd get away with that question, so I'm going to follow it on quickly. And following on from that, was there any discussion around supporting them, that's the two neighbouring district councils, on the question of their southern boundaries?
Yes. And can I give it context? When local government and central government interact, it is my experience that local government usually loses. That's just a statement of directness. And the best way in which local government can try and change central government's view is to hunt as a pack. The three mayors of Nelson, Marlborough and Tasman and the three chief executives met. We made plain to our two neighbouring mayors that we felt very strongly about the NELMAC issue. The Tasman and Marlborough councils made plain they felt very strongly about the southern boundary issue. They agreed to back us strongly on NELMAC and did. And I agreed that we would strongly back them on the southern boundary issues that affect them with respect to Murchison for Tasman and Ward and Seddon. And so it is fair for you, Councillor Courtney, to draw a conclusion that there was a strong cooperative attitude around those issues. And now Tasman and Marlborough feel that we've got our win because the government's moved on Nelmat. Now, come on, you guys, come to the party and back us on our big issue where they're worried about the splits of their community. And that did motivate that portion of my mayoral submission to be true to that relationship with our two neighbouring councils.
Thanks for explaining that.
Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā koe te koromatua. So early on in the discussion we had, it was brought up that the central government position with Ngāi Tahu, in particular with Wairoa in Marlborough, that the relationship is non-negotiable. This brings into question some of the delicate issues about when we're redefining our territories, where the Wairoa has their constitutional obligation to Ngāi Tahu as one of their iwi, and so does Tasman. Nelson City Council is not necessarily as encumbered as what the other councils are with this dynamic. But how are we going to navigate our way through these overlapping territories and the obligations that, like the impression that I got that central government was really they're not going to move on. They've made deals with Ngāi Tahu without compromising our Te Tauihu iwi, iwi e waru o Te Tauihu.
A good and difficult question. The first thing is there's a bit of contradiction in government policy in the sense that with respect to Ngāi Tahu, they are saying that Rohe boundary must be followed with water services, whereas right through the North Island, the new water entities all over the place are different from the Rohe boundaries. The second thing for me is that in our region, we have had to accommodate the fact that Ngāi Tahu has tangata whenua status over the areas of Murchison, Seddon and Ward. And we do that, for instance, in the Resource Management Bill before Parliament, is that in combining the plan for Nelson and Tasman, there are 9 iwi that are involved, our 8 Te Tauihu iwi, as well as Ngāi Tahu. And so for me, and particularly that reform is significant, that bill's before Parliament. It does not change the boundary. And where I've got great sympathy with Marlborough and Tasman is you're going to have the water regulatory function under the new Natural and Built Environment Bill, with the water in Murchison from that point of view being managed from Richmond, but when it comes to the water services being managed from Christchurch. Now, Kahu, you've got more expertise in this area than anybody, but I think it's going to be an ongoing area where we're going to need expertise about how do we manage constructive, cordial relations with our iwi partners, respecting their Rohe status, but also making it practically work for the communities we serve. Are there any other questions? It is simply a noting, and can I make very clear, in noting my submission, I am not asking councillors to necessarily agree or disagree with it. It's just noting that it has happened. So I'd like to put item 5 on my mayor's report. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I now come to the review of the Nelson Festivals Trust reserves. This is an item that's being managed by the Deputy Mayor, and I'd like him to speak to this item.
Oh, kia ora koutou. So attached there is the report that myself, Councillor Courtney and Councillor Brand have developed following our delegations from the deliberations on the annual plan. So in completing this review, we've met with both Group Manager Andrew White, Community Services, and the Nelson Festivals Trust Chair, Ali Boswick, and Trustee Sarah Yarrow. I won't go too deeply into the report. I think it speaks for itself in many regards, although I would just highlight that within those considerations and the process for reaching that has been both the presentation from the Trust on their financials, but also a review of the publicly available financials through the Charities Register. And so from that, we've recommended that there was not any justification for, let me find the exact wording, for the appropriateness or otherwise of the trust using those cash reserves to help partially fund the 2023 Arts Festival, given the acute budgetary pressures on council and ratepayers. So we are recommending, we've got 3 recommendations. One, that we reinstate the $175,000 of Arts Festival funding that was removed through the annual plan process, that consistent with all of the other similar arts organisations that received the 3.5% inflation adjustment through the annual plan, that we similarly apply that. The case being that if the $175,000 hadn't been removed, that would have been applied through the resolutions made at the final deliberations on the annual plan. And 3, endorsing a shift from a contractual arrangement to a grant funding for the Nelson Festivals Trust, with work already underway by officers on that, but we just want to give our, as a council, endorsement of that is through this process. It's been clear that that would be an improvement to both our relationship with the trust. I want to thank both the trust, Andrew and staff, and Trudy and Mel for their work through this process. I want to acknowledge that this will be, one, a piece of unbudgeted expenditure, and that is not the ideal situation that we would be in at this point. And it was something that, as a review group, we reflected on quite significantly, and think that there are definitely learnings here around how to approach issues like this in the future, and making sure that prior to the sign-off of an annual plan, a review like this is completed in advance, not after the fact, to avoid these kinds of unexpected budgetary pressures, and also acknowledging that as a result of these financial significance, that a report will have to come back from officers on the implications of this. I'll hand across, I guess, to Councillor Courtney or Councillor Brand if there's any further comments.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor and the 2 councillors who are involved, and would like to give them the opportunity to comment before I ask others to, if they've got any questions. Did you wish to add any comment, Councillor Courtney?
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to our Deputy Mayor for leading this review, and his report is accurate, and I endorse that and thank him for it. In a nutshell, the Trust was formed in 2018 and had its first very successful 12 months in 2019. And I say very successful, and I won't quote figures here, it's not appropriate. And then and here's the nub of the issue for me, I noticed 2019, 20, 21, 22, at no stage did they underspend any funding received from the Nelson City Council. So in other words, perhaps I phrased it a little bit differently, they spent the full amount that was funded to them. So there wasn't an accumulation of funds as one of the aspects we were looking at possibly during the COVID period. That didn't happen. And I was clear in my mind about that. So I was happy to proceed and question them further. And as we did with our General Manager, Officer White. So no, happy with where it sits, and I think it should go to our financial people to have a look and to sign it off once they've decided it.
Thanks, Councillor Courtney. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just concur with both the Deputy and Councillor Courtney. I think from our discussions that we had, I feel that the Arts Festival Trust have shown how resilient they were during COVID and how they did try to deliver on contractual obligations despite the environment that we were all operating under at that time. They have taken to heart the initial intent of when the Art Festival Trust was set up, by looking for future financial sustainability and what that can bring to the table away from councils directed funding. And I feel that again, just reiterate that there's recommendation 3 about moving forward is a great option, and that our community certainly benefits from what they have brought.
Thanks. Councillor Brand, I'll have a question or comment from Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Rohan, Mel and Trudy, thanks for the report. It was really great. Appreciate your work on that. My question is really, I'm curious as to why we're not accepting the report and moving the recommendations that are in the report. So I maybe somebody could speak to that.
My understanding of good process is that we now need to resolve the issue as to how we'll fund that. I made plain to the council when we set up the review that I would accept its recommendations. And so the proper step is for us as the governance unit to just confirm that position, which is what we're doing today, is we're confirming we accept the recommendations of the report, and then we're asking our staff the how to. The bit I think, Councillor Sanson, that your question does raise is that we want to give the Nelson Festivals Trust that's about to embark in what is a challenging winter on it, and I wish to give them the assurance from the Mayor, and that is the recommendations from the review group will be carried out, but we need to give the staff the fair opportunity to then work about where that money will come from. So that is the reason it's framed in that way, Councillor Sanson.
Thanks. So just a subsequent question then, could we not put in an additional line, maybe something before that one that just says that we accept the findings of the report? I just think, we don't actually say that, and I think that that's really important to acknowledge that. And then, so that's the first question. Can we just, no,
I don't understand.
Sorry, I just want us to add in an additional recommendation that we accept the report, we accept their findings. And then the second question is, can this be time bound? Like, just because the festival's in October, can we put August, for example, that the report comes back to the August meeting? Because I think it's really unfair on the festival for it to be dragged out till September, just before the festival.
I'm quite open to both those suggestions, subject to the agreement of the Deputy Mayor. Can I just check with the Chief Executive? What would be a reasonable time bound for you? And it's really in Nikki's space. What's a reasonable time frame? Do you quite satisfied that you're going to be able to respond for the report by the August meeting? This time. So let's just play with some words if I can take on board the constructive suggestions from Councillor Sanson. I think it is useful to specifically have the words that we started by noting that Council accepts the recommendations of the report.
Can we just say we accept it? I don't think we have to note, do we? I think.
Or if I'm going to leave to the smart wordsmiths to come up with what's the wording, right phrase. But basically, the meaning we want to be able to transform is that we collectively as a council endorse the report and requests council office to produce a report, and then after the word report, I would say for its August meeting. Does that, Youth Councillor Darcy Laurie?
Thanks, Mayor Nick. Through the Mayor, just a quick question for Rohan, or two quick questions. Why was the $175,000 funding removed during the annual plan process, and what would the benefit be of a move to a grant funding system for the Nelson Festivals Trust?
I'm so pleased that questions for the Deputy Mayor and not the Mayor.
I was going to say I probably can't fully answer the first question. I wasn't entirely across that aspect of decision making. The move to grant funding, I think, just reflects the wider relationship that exists between the trust and council. The contract for delivery reflects, I think, it doesn't reflect the full independence and strength of the trust's ability to deliver the festival, and so it just provides for a more open and flexible relationship between ourselves and the trust.
It's the toughest question I've had this morning. I'm not so keen on this idea of having these youth councillors holding us to account. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you through the Mayor. Just adding to Darcy's first question. So it is a significant U-turn, and I'm not interested in allocating blame. We landed a decision to withdraw this funding on incomplete information. I'm just wondering about lessons learned and me being happy being presented with the full story in the future, because it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, the view that I would take as mayor was that our council was under financial pressure and asked council for savings and areas where they could deliver savings. There was a lack of clarity about the issue that had the Arts Festival built up substantive reserves as a consequence of under-delivery in COVID or for other reasons. And what our council decided as we clarified that issue, that actually we needed some people to go away and answer that. I think your challenge is correct, Councillor Anderson, and that is, could we have got that information earlier in the process? Maybe. I'm satisfied that inquiring into it for the sum of money properly was worthwhile. I think our group of councillors did a good job of that. And this may sound strange, but in my discussions with the Trust, I actually think the relationship between the Nelson City Council and the Nelson Festival Arts Trust has actually been enhanced by us better understanding how they run the festival. So yes, it's been a bump along the road, but I think it has been managed both by staff and particularly by the Deputy Mayor in such a way that the relationship is actually stronger than what it was at the beginning of the process. Would you like to comment at all, Deputy Mayor?
No.
The Chief Executive?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to put on record my concern around this process that we are so soon after adopting an annual plan that we've got to find this level of funding. But noting that you are about to take a decision that is effectively making a decision to take this funding, I don't see the need to bring a report back in August to if you're going to take a decision as elected members, which you're absolutely entitled to do, I will go away and find a way to do that. I don't need to bring a report back to this council. So I think to give surety to the trust, I think if you're going to take a decision today, I don't see the need to bring a report back. I think you should make a decision and adopt it.
Okay. So approves the recommendations and rather than reporting back, and requests council officers to implement its recommendations. Makes it nice and clean. If I can reduce items for future, then I know that August is going to be a very challenging meeting anyway for times and more efficient. Can you get the right wording for us, Nikki?
I would just put from the actual, there are some resolutions that I think had been drafted by Rohan around improving the unbudgeted expenditure. So they just need to be pulled through.
There's 3 recommendations in the report.
Can I suggest that we just park this, allow Nikki to work with Robin on getting the resolution correct and come back to it after we deal with the remits for the local government conference? A councillor is comfortable for me just to exercise that discretion from the chair in moving the agenda. So we're just going to get them a bit more work so that we save an extra report at the August meeting. And I think it also addresses Councillor Sanson's point of giving the festival certainty at the earliest possible opportunity. So let's move and just park item 5 of the Mayor's report and move to item 6. Here is the way that I would like to handle these remits. We have a strong delegation of 6 councillors, including the Deputy Mayor and myself, going to the LGNZ conference at the end of the month. My view on these remits is that sometimes you actually want to be reasonably nimble-footed and listen to the debate about the remits and colleagues, in which case you would be delegating to the 6 going to conference effectively the decision about how we would vote on those remits. And so there are effectively on each of these remits 3 options that we decide to support, we decide not to support, or effectively you delegate to the 6 representatives that are going to conference. As Mayor, If you take the last option, confirm at AGM, I will simply be taking a democratic approach across the councillors that you have delegated to go there. So if there's 6 of us going, then in the event that we take this to confirm at the AGM, then it will be up to that group of councillors to come to a consensus on the position, having had some interchange and talked with colleagues. So what I would like to do is to go through each of the 11 remits. It's going to be a very long process if you want to comment on all of them, but just by a quick show of hands of support, not support, or leave it to our delegation on each of them as we go through, and invite councillors who have got a strong view on any of the remits to do that, and then just move systematically through each of the remits. We come to remit 1. This is with respect to the allocation of risk and liability in the building sector. I have to tell you, this is an issue I feel very strongly about. My view is that councillors are to take an unacceptable level of risk, that this actually is counterproductive for New Zealand in the way in which we manage the building consenting. I think it is a very well formulated remit, and I would like Nelson City Council to support it. Are there other views? Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Nick. I support it also. I do wonder, and I have read through it carefully, but I'm not sure if it addresses this, that we would also want to avoid the situation of the homeowner or the purchaser of the property being left with substantial costs that no one at all, at the moment, I know it's council, falls to council as the so-called last man standing, which is not a good situation, but there is someone standing.
Yeah.
Who will be standing if we get this remit through and we start on this work to protect the homeowner?
I think Councillor Statard's contribution is right on the money. Could I just express this point of view so people understand the significance of the issue? Is in a standard building project, the level of council fees is typically about 2 or 3% of the total building cost. But if it goes to custard, then the practice has become that the council is 100% liable. Now, the further thing that caused me concern during my period as Minister of Building is that most building companies, including professional consultancy companies, are on average winding themselves up every 4 years. And that's all the commercial incentives that drive it. Now, the right answer in other jurisdictions, Councillor Stallard, is that those building companies are required through bonding to be able to meet their share of the liability. And in my view, changing that culture where the actual consultants, whether they be architects or engineers, as well as the actual building companies themselves, have to take a greater degree of the liability will positively change the culture that we need as part of the broader building sector. And so that's why it's right for you to alert it. We don't want the homeowner left in the lurch, but I think there are ways within the remit that it can be done to improve the way the legislation works around building liability. Can I have an indication by a show of hands whether Nelson City Council should support remit 1? Supported. Remit number 2 is with respect to rates rebate. Happy to take comments of people on that issue. Councillor Courtney and then Councillor Stella.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. I definitely think this needs to be looked at. I know it's not widely supported by, well, it's zone 3 here, but I really do think we'd be remiss, extremely remiss, if we didn't get it onto the floor of the conference, because it is so important. It's so fundamental to the people that have put us here, and I think we owe it to them to have a very, very close look at this, scrutinise it closely, and I hope the conference does. So I would like us to support this.
Thanks, Councillor Courtney. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Nick. I just have a couple of questions. What proportion of ratepayers do claim a rebate? Do we know that? And also, does the current sort of settings for rebates, how does it handle homeowners who are asset rich and income poor?
I can answer one of those. The Nelson City Council runs a scheme for people that are asset rich, income poor, to effectively use the Nelson City Council as a reverse mortgagee to cover that off. That is a scheme that is not well known, and in my view, we could do more to make people aware of that. Nikki, is it possible for you to be able to answer Councillor Stallard's earlier question and that is what proportion of Nelson ratepayers, as I understand your question, take up the opportunity of the rates rebate?
So through the mayor, it's sort of hovering around the 1,700 ratepayers mark, and it hasn't really increased as we would have expected it to with an ageing population. So
the only caution I had about the remit, and I'm sorry if I look through a central government lens, is the government yesterday announced that they have a deficit of over $6 billion. And I think whoever is government is going to be under enormous financial pressure post-October. And local government and the number of these remits is asking for more government money, and local government just needs to be careful in making sure the things that it's asking for are the highest priority. The key thing for me to be reasonably sympathetic to the remit was ensuring that the thresholds for applicants are regularly adjusted in a high inflation environment. So on balance, I'm supportive. Are there any other comments? That being the case, by indication of hands, those who support Nelson Council supporting the rates rebate remit, please put their hand up. Clear majority. We come to item number 3, which is on roading transport maintenance funding. Welcome any comments from colleagues on remit 3. Councillor Anderson.
I noticed it's supported by Tasman, but our council wasn't in the document.
Is
there a reason for that?
Sorry?
I was wondering if there was a reason for that, whether we must
Rohan's been leading council's work with LGNZ. Any comment, Rohan?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the sort of remit process is to get a remit on the floor, you either need it supported by a zone, a sector, or a number of councils. The exact number has left my brain at this moment. But it is then often there'll be councils that support remits just to get them onto the floor. So with this one, we were approached but didn't have the opportunity to fully discuss with councillors. And it was already had the required number of councillors supporting it. So we decided just to pause and have a democratic discussion on where our support would go, knowing that it would already be coming to the conference.
I was reasonably supportive of remit number 3, knowing our own council actually has quite a significant challenge around our road maintenance budgets, and having to lift the level of renewals for us to be good ancestors was a comment I think that Councillor Pakipaki used on some of the informal discussions around road maintenance. Can I have an indication of show of hands for support for remit number 3? Clear support. Let's come to remit number 4 on the local election accessibility issue. Any councillors wish to make comment on remit 4? Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, so I'm supportive of this. I think running for elections is quite exclusionary. It often depends on, private funding or having to sell your soul to, some independent organisation who may, share, who may commit funding. So I think it's really good for people to be able to access independent, independent, an election fund like this, and to make running for local government as accessible to everybody in our community as possible.
Thanks, Councillor Sanson. Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor. It was a quick question that occurred to me the other night. I was reading through this, whether or not that the disabled community, do they represent a disproportionately lower number of political participation or electoral participation than the general population? Do we know those sorts of numbers?
Generally speaking, people with serious disability are underrepresented around both council tables around New Zealand and in Parliament.
As elected members, or because is this as elected members, or
yes, what's proposed here is that Parliament introduced a fund so that, let's say that I was had a disability that required extra expenses for me to stand for Parliament. The fund was introduced to pay for the cost of a sign language interpreter, extra travel costs, all those things. And what this remit is effectively intending to do is to extend that assistance that's available to parliamentary candidates to council elections. Deputy Mayor.
So there was more. So the question goes: is that participation with our those who represent a disabled community within? Because I know of someone that's on a council, city council, major city council, who has a hearing impairment, and I understand that they just utilise their equipment. But the question was about: do we know what sort of representation there is of participation of? And it would be really interesting to know that those who intend to run, who have a disability, their success rates, and the correlation between whether their seats that are being awarded or their success through the electoral process is impeded by the particular disability that they have. So is there a correlation between that?
I'm not aware. I don't know whether any others have any. Deborah, do we have any information at all along the lines of Councillor Pakipaki's question? Any advice for us?
I'm not aware.
You're not aware.
I mean, I'm in support of it. I think it's a great idea, but I would like to base if we're making decisions, on facts rather than feel good.
I think the facts are twofold. First is that people with disabilities are underrepresented on New Zealand's democratic bodies, both councils, regional and parliament. And secondly, that people with disabilities, as a consequence of being a candidate, do face some additional costs, whether they be hearing aids, whether they be transport or other. I'm quite confident of asserting both those things with respect to this remit. The exact numbers, I don't have. The Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'm incredibly supportive of this. I've done some work in this space, and we know that the barriers of engaging politically are significantly higher for those people with disabilities. The one thing I would note is I think that if this passes and lobbying is successful, there will have to be a reflection of that within the fund itself, noting the significantly higher number of elected members and candidates within local body relative to parliamentary elections. But I think that this is a very logical extension of both the purpose of the Election Access Fund, and really should have been applied when it was first established as well, because local democracy is missing those voices as much as Parliament is.
Councillor Hodgson?
Yeah, I'm really supportive of this remit. I noted that it talks about providing New Zealand Sign Language interpreters, and it just raised a question for me sort of as a council, in that if someone came onto council next term whose only language was New Zealand Sign Language, or it raises the question of other languages, how prepared are we to kind of facilitate their involvement and engagement in a council meeting? Because it's obviously something that we haven't experienced. And I guess secondary to that is, if someone were to come and make a submission, do we provide anything in terms of interpreters for submissions on the long-term plan, for example?
We can, and we do it on demand. I don't know whether the Chief Executive or Robin would like to comment. So going a little bit beyond the remit, but my assumption would be that we would be an accessibility-friendly council, and that if people made requests for support for either a sign language interpreter or the other, that we would do so. Any comment, Robin? We can do so if we get, as long as we get notice. And I think that's our duty is also to make it that we are going to be, that we're going to go the extra mile. The reason for my support for this is also out of the issue of consistency. If I had my way, I would have as much consistency between the parliamentary election processes and rules and local government. This is available at the parliamentary level, and for that reason, to me, makes sense as well. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Remit 4, local. Oh, I'm sorry. And being the spokesperson for disabilities, I've been remiss. Councillor Rollo.
I would just say that I think we should be ringing up Local Government New Zealand Zone 1 and saying we fully support this. As someone who attends quarterly meetings with the disability sector, I think if we had a candidate stand for council and was elected, I think a local council would have a huge wake-up call in working with that person. So I think we should be fully supportive of this, and long may this sector get elected to council.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask for a show of hands supporting the remit 4 on local election accessibility. Unanimous. We move to the issue of co-chairs. The bit on this remit that I'm very supportive of is just giving councils flexibility to be able to organise their governance arrangements, particularly when we're dealing with Nelson and Tasman. It would be quite sensible to have legal clarity that you could have co-chairs of some of the joint committees that we have. And so I'm supportive of the remit number 5, making explicit in the local government law that councils can choose to have co-chair arrangements on its committees. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, I'm very supportive of this. I think that it's hugely beneficial in terms of increasing or upskilling and increasing diversity of representation in chairing or co-chairing roles for all kinds of people, not just across, councils, not just Tasman and Nelson, but Māori and Pakeha, men and women, just young and old. It's just a really great move. So I'm very supportive of this.
Okay, Councillor Brand.
Through the Mayor, we currently have examples of where we do work with co-chairs with our joint committees with our neighbouring councils. So this is just a formalisation of that nationwide is what we're doing already locally.
What the remit is seeking is the law make it explicit. At the moment, it is a little bit fuzzy as to whether you can. And that's what's intended. Can I have an indication of a show of hands for support for remit 5? Again, that is unanimous in support. We move to parking infringement penalties. I'm very supportive. I do think it is proper for Parliament to set limits, but I think greater flexibility around the setting of parking fines would be a good thing. And so I'm supportive of remit 6. Is there any contrary view around the council table? Again, just indication by a show of hands for remit 6. Moving to remit 7 on rural and regional transport from the Waikato Regional Council. Any particular views? I'm a little bit nervous around just how much in the fiscal environment of the situation on remit 7, but happy to take comments. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. So I'm really supportive of this one also. Having been involved in some local government public transport conversations, there's often talk about having interregional public transport, like we've got this great public transport service that's about to be launched, an improved service that's about to be launched in the region, and yet it doesn't extend to Blenheim. It would be great to be able to get on really regular and affordable public transport to Blenheim, to Christchurch, to Westport, Picton, all of those things, around the country. So very supportive of regional public transport improvements.
Thank you. Any other comments? The Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'd also just note that at the start of this year, there was a shift in the government's messaging around what urban centres would be getting a focus on public transport. That did not include a regional centre such as Nelson. And I shudder to think what the case would have been if when in the last term we were developing our overhaul public transport system and working to get funding through Waka Kotahi, what the outcome of that focus purely on the top, the most populous cities in our country, as opposed to accounting for the fact that somewhere like Nelson can and should and will support a thriving public transport system. And so I think that this helps fill in that wider picture, is that where there are communities that can support and deliver public transport, they should.
So again, just show of hands on remit number 7 with respect to regional transport. Again, that is supported. Let's move to remit 8, resolution service. Any views on this? Councillor Anderson.
I was just wondering, background and contents. So you've got the list of support councils, and there's also mention of young elected members supporting this. I was just wondering whether Deputy Mayor know anything about this, or is there anything specific to their views?
Yes, I am aware of this resolution, or this remit initially came out of the Young Elected Members Committee that I sit on. Although I wasn't intimately involved in its drafting, I think it reflects a desire for the ability for informal formal intervention where needed, of just being able to bring in without using the existing resources that we have within the local government sector to help mediate and navigate issues as they arise. Obviously, councillors have not been out of the media spotlight in the past 6 months when it comes to internal conflicts around council tables, and this is simply suggesting that LGNZ look at what role they could play further to help navigate those situations. I don't think it should stop the local resolution of issues as much as possible, nor does it stop further escalations, but simply provides another step to avoid us and avoid councils reaching those really painful places that has been reported across the past few terms.
I'm pretty supportive of a more nationally consistent system around this. The devil's in the detail and making sure it works well, but it can be quite insular when it's within a relatively small organisation. And so I'm getting something on an arm's length basis. I also think if we look at the difficulties that have been experienced at the Gore Council, there is also potential for LGNZ to play a constructive role in supporting local government around these really tough issues. So I'm reasonably supportive. Any other perspectives? Just again, a show of hands. Those in favour, please raise their hand. Against? That is carried. Earthquake-prone buildings. This remit seeks an investigation and report into how councils can meet the timeframes. The only thing that I would note on this declare interest is that I was the minister responsible for writing the earthquake-prone building legislation, was that the original Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch earthquakes said that all buildings should be upgraded nationwide within 5 years. We moved substantially from that in providing a different timetable, with some buildings stretched out as long as 55 years, where they were low risk and where they were in the areas of New Zealand where earthquakes were the least prone. What this remit is effectively doing is pushing for a relaxation of those timetables. And I understand it is tough for local government, and we're facing our own series of issues, whether it be with the hospital, whether it be with the cathedral, whether it be with our own buildings. The only thing is, you also have to look at the other side of the risk, and that is by delaying the strengthening, you are also extending playing the game of Russian roulette, that the earthquake might come before you strengthen the buildings. Can I make a suggestion on this one? And that is that we leave it to the delegation. That is the third option, rather than being a yes or a no, that we go to confirm at the AGM. That would be my preferred position, just to hear what the nature of, if the proponents of it are really quite transparently arguing for a lot slacker timetables, I'd want to do a bit of pushback. If they've got some nuancing that they're seeking, then I might be more relaxed about a change in the law. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So just to clarify, by leaving it to the delegation to vote based on the information they hear, just on your last comment, does that mean, because I have real concerns about this and about timeliness and about the serious risk. We saw what happened in Christchurch, we saw what happened in Kaikoura, we've seen what happens in other places. Timeframes are put in to ensure that people took responsibility and managed and moved things forward before the one day might never happen kind of attitude approached. I'm quite aware that the Kiwi attitude of the, oh, she'll be right, mate, may kick in and we can just do it as we need. But lives are at risk. Buildings need to get seen. A lot of work was done by different national emergency qualified people who have addressed numerous at-risk buildings throughout New Zealand and offered resolutions and stuff. So would the delegation then be inquiring into how and when and what is the enforcement to ensure that that happens in a timely way if you've got no time frame?
Firstly, can I answer? In the event that we go for my preferred option, confirm at the AGM, it will be a collective decision of the 6 delegates there to decide finally how Nelson indicates its vote. In respect of the question, part of the context, Councillor Brand, is that the O2 Act simply left the timetable for strengthening earthquake buildings over to local government. And what the Royal Commission of Inquiry concluded was that it was just too hard and councils would never get round to it. They would just get too much pushback from their community, and that Parliament actually needed to set down a rational timetable. I don't know whether that completely addresses your question. Do you want to make further comment? Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Nick. I'm one of the councillors going to Christchurch for this conference. An initial reflection is that the wording of the remit, to me, is a bit inadequate. It's asking to help councils and communities. And I'm not sure I would want to make this case, but one could make the case that we'd help them more by saying, let's stick to those guidelines because the risks are just too high. They're unacceptable if we extend it. It does seem, when we get into the wording of this remit, that they are seeking to help council communities by relaxing those timelines and so on. So I think it is a case, this is to me very important remit, and I would want to hear from those councillors who are not going in it today because I think there's enough information here to give some kind of opinion. But I would probably almost prefer to make a decision today because I don't support the remit as it stands.
Councillor Rainey.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
The remit as it stands is just investigate and report members. I mean, so I actually would feel relaxed about leaving that up to my colleagues who are attending the conference. However, as you've pointed out, me and Nick, relaxation of timelines in regards to this issue goes both ways. And I do have some concerns and would want to know, I guess, NCC would have a register of its own buildings that are earthquake prone, but do we actually have a register of privately held buildings that are earthquake prone? I presume we do. And is that something that's shared amongst councillors or easily identified?
Can I just check with Mandy, who leads the building and the regulatory team? My understanding is that we do have a list, not just of our own buildings that are earthquake prone, but those that have been deemed earthquake prone under the legislation. Could you able to answer Councillor Rainey's question in that regard, please, Mandy?
Yes, short answer. We've got a list of those buildings that meet the criteria for us to go and check.
There is no
provide information.
Yeah. What your question brings out, Councillor Rainey, there's no question that there are a substantive number of buildings in our community that are not owned by council, that are affected by this legislation, and in some cases it may be uneconomic for those building owners to be able to strengthen them. And as the legislation bites, that is going to be challenging. And that's what has brought about the remit. The bit of the remit that made me a little bit nervous was when it used language like saying, oh, there's been buildings that have been standing for 70 to 140 years, so they're not earthquake prone. That is not technically sound. That is, if you take a building like Nelson College, which we've got a number of students, people say, well, it can't be an earthquake building because we had the Murchison earthquake and it stood up. And what people fail to appreciate is every 25 kilometres, the strength of an earthquake halves, and with Murchison being a long way away, that would be a fraction of the level of shaking that if we had a Murchison-sized earthquake in Nelson. It would be incredibly dangerous for a building of that sort. And so it's the language that goes with the remit that has made me a little bit nervous. because it makes assertions that I don't think are technically sound with respect to seismic risk. Do you have any further comment, Pete?
No,
I'm just going to test the group. My recommendation from the chair is that on remit 9, that we confirm at the AGM that the delegation that we're sending there. Or could I test with a show of hands whether people would be comfortable with that recommendation? Those that would prefer we supported, those that would prefer we opposed. Okay. That also is helpful just in terms of when we get to the delegation, that there are a couple of our councillors that would prefer we just took a clear position that we did not support that remit. Remit number 10 is with respect to KiwiSaver contributions for elected members. Particularly important for our young elected members, of which we've got more than our fair share. Any perspectives? Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Nick, through the chair. Yeah, very supportive of this also. I think that the low level of remuneration for elected members in in the regions also excludes a whole lot of people from seriously considering running for council. So I think anything that we can do to make it more attractive and to support a diversity of people to be around the table and for them not to be financially penalised by choosing to represent their community rather than taking a job and, you know, outside of local government where they would earn KiwiSaver is really important. So very supportive of this.
Is there any other? Councillor Courtney.
Yes, I endorse Rachel's point of view, and I think anything at all that breaks down the fences and the barriers to precluding people from participating in democracy is very worthy of support. So no, I definitely support it.
Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā koe. I find it very interesting that we have no problems talking about appropriate skills and with our consultants that we get in that are very, very, very expensive. And yet that's not recognised across the table in our elected members with the diversity of their skills that they bring to the table and the fact that they sometimes have to put their lives on hold to make this happen for the community really needs to be reflected in the remuneration. And I support exactly what Councillor Sanson said, is that no disrespect to anyone here at this table, of course, and I sit here with you, we get what we pay for. And if we're wanting the cream of the crop, we want to attract people to this sort of the involvement here, then I think that it's only just that it be reflected in the remuneration. So, kia ora.
I'm taking from those two contributions to support, but again, I'll ask for the show of hands of those that wishes to support the KiwiSaver remit, number 10. That is support. We come to the last one with respect to audit fees. This was the one that most excited me, and I am going to table a letter from Audit New Zealand, who have just written to me and said that they are going to be increasing the audit fees for this financial year by 40%, from 174,000 to 243,000. I asked down for a historic breakdown because it unnerved me so much, and I noted that over the last decade, on average, our audit fees have been growing at twice the rate of inflation. It makes it incredibly hard for council to try and keep its rates at an affordable level for its community when government agencies that compulsorily levy us put their fees up to that degree, in this case by 40% over the next year. And so that makes me incredibly supportive of Remit 11 around Audit New Zealand's fees. I don't want to be overly critical of Audit New Zealand. Part of the problem is that Parliament and the government keeps asking extra things for audit to do in their inspection of councils. And as a consequence, they then actually have to do a lot more work. And I do think this remit is a real reminder to central government to be, if it wants more, then it should pay for more and not just dump these continuous extra costs onto councils. And I am going to table the letter that I've received from Audit New Zealand for the information of both councillors and our community, because I was so shocked by the scale of the increase. Are there any other questions on Remit 11? Can I have a show of hands of those that would indicate support by Nelson City Council for it? Thank you. That now resolves all the issues of the Mayor's report and gives clear guidance for the delegation going to Christchurch for our position. What I'd now like to do is put the resolution that's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Courtney for item 6 of the Mayor's report for us now to adopt that position on those 11 remits. Could those in favour please say aye? Aye. To the contrary say no. That is carried. We'll now revert back to the item of which I'm hoping our governance team has found some wording that clears off the Arts Festival funding. So that resolution effectively puts on record us adopting the recommendations of the subcommittee, and it also provides the certainty that Councillor Sanson sought for the Arts Festival rather than standing it for a month. And it also satisfies my chief executive, who doesn't want to have his staff writing more reports when effectively it's just adding bureaucracy to the process. Does anybody have any concerns with the new wording that's been drafted by council officers? I think it fairly reflects the wish. Councillor Stella.
Yeah, just a question I think I'll have with the wording. Obviously, unbudgeted expenditure is not good, but could we have some guidance or information about why it's not good specifically? What problems it causes and where it leads to?
Anybody?
I can answer that. It effectively means your rate take should have been 175 plus whatever the inflation is higher. And because it's unbudgeted and unless there's an identified saving somewhere else, it effectively ends up being borrowed at the end of the year.
That is, that the advice you get is absolutely correct, but it's also true that when we're dealing with a budget of over $200 million, you've got lots of items moving all the time, some going up, some going down, but we couldn't handle too many of these without going outside my comfort zone. Councillor Sanson?
Not a question, but a comment. Is it now or?
Yes, it's both. Firstly, was just to clarify that our officers had reasonably drawn together a resolution that was consistent with the questions that you had raised and others.
Yeah, so I think I just want to acknowledge the CE and staff for being responsive, suggesting this approach and, you know, saving us writing another report. So I think it's great that we're becoming more nimble as an organisation. So thanks, really appreciate that, Nigel.
The new style of the CE. This is not the only thing he's doing damn well, I tell you. All right. Is there anybody wish to debate it? If not, sorry, it's appropriate for the person who's actually done the hard work on this one. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, only a third or probably a sixth of the hard work, considering everyone involved. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, really glad that we can actually just get this signed, sealed and delivered today. To quote Stevie Wonder, it is an arts-based topic, so it's required. I do just want to highlight a couple of things that I didn't cover in my preamble, which is just to really acknowledge with the Arts Festival, 2 points in those considerations. One is the significant cost with pre-delivery in both 2020 and 2021, and especially in 2021, where for those of us who were around, we got to attend a program launch. We were ready and waiting for this festival to go ahead, and at the last minute it was cancelled. And I want to acknowledge the approach that the festival took in that year, which was to continue to remunerate artists for the time that they'd already put in preparing significant amount of work, and in booking out the period that they were to come and perform. That's the benefit we get from community organisations like this, is that they look at these issues through the lens not just of financial delivery, but also through the community impact of those cancellations and actually doing their part to support the arts sector through that as well. I want to highlight just the final point as well under those considerations, the long-term financial viability and independence of the trust, to say that the trust having reserves is a good thing. It means that if a year gets rocky, they're not actually coming back to us to ask for more funding because their bottom line isn't at zero. It also provides that security to start looking and being more visionary and forward thinking in terms of how that trust operates. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I also really want to acknowledge the independence of the trust, and I guess lay down the wero to councillors that often with these, things we treasure that have come out of council, we still tend to view them as if they're ours. The trust is independent. It operates at an arm's length from us. And as a result of that, the festival costs us less than it did because often more than 50% of it is paid for through outside grants and sponsorship, a lot of which was not available to council when we were delivering this service in-house. And so I hope that we can really recognise and reflect that as this relationship continues. And I already have had a few conversations, luckily, as part of this process on what the Arts Festival may be holding later this year. And let me just say, it is an incredibly exciting prospect. And I think with this decision, I know that a flurry of further decisions to make that festival even more exciting will be occurring probably within the hour. So I just want to say, let's go support our arts sector and see the wonderful things that this funding actually brings to life and contributes to our city, both culturally and in terms of the economic development and support of our city centre.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. The last bit I'd say on this, there will be issues, and it does need to be an issue that's significant, that sometimes there'll be different views around the council table. And often it's not because we have different views, it's because we haven't got crystal clear on the facts. And this is a process that on other issues that get tricky, my view is getting a group of councillors to go away and do an investigation and come back in, I think is actually not a bad governance process for us to resolve in front of those. And I want to thank the Deputy Mayor for the work he did in doing that, and would now like to put the resolution. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those contrary, say no. That is carried. I'd now like to come back to the very beginning of my report, and the reason I'm doing that is because there are some items in my report that were not covered by those specific topics requiring a resolution, and now is the opportunity if councillors have any questions about the issues that we haven't discussed that are otherwise in the members' report before we put resolution number 1. That being the case, I will put the first resolution in the Mayor's report. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. That is carried. That completes the Mayor's report. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then when we resume, we'll come on to the next item on the agenda. Council is adjourned. conservative approach in declaring interest. The Chief Executive has clarified for me that because we're only receiving a report, there is no need for any constraint on Councillor Anderson or Councillor Hodgson, who did declare an interest as being involved in some of the community organisations that receive grants. Welcome before the committee, Andrew and Mark. Happy for you to make some opening comments on the report.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. I'll just do a brief introduction and then hand over to Mr. Preston Thomas. This is really a procedural item around this most important part of council's business in supporting our most vulnerable communities. We run a number of grants processes every year, strategic grants and short grants, small grants, and this is just the latest round, an update for council on the latest rounds. I'll hand over to Mr. Preston Thomas and we can take any questions.
Kia ora and thank you, Mayor Nick and Andrew. As Andrew's just said, this reflects the small grants funding round. It was the final round for the previous financial year held in June, and I'll take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
I just had a simple question in understanding council processes. How regularly does the community investment funding update before council come? We provide you with a budget for a year. You've got these two different pools that you run. How often do we receive these reports? Just for me to understand the cycle of reporting.
We provide the reports after each funding round. Often the strategic round, which happens every 3 years, will happen in close proximity to the small grants round for that year, and we would report on those together in that instance.
And when is the next strategic funding round for?
It'll be in the start of after the new LTP is adopted, which will be in July 2024.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues? Very straightforward. Really appreciate the report. Good for us to get a feel for what we're funding. Also appreciating reading the number of organisations that were not successful is some of the hard choices that are made by the committee. On that basis, is there a colleague that's prepared to move the adoption of the report? Thanks, Councillor Hodgson. Seconded by Councillor Brand. Is there any debate? That being the case, I'll put the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come to the next item on the agenda, and that is with respect to the seismic strengthening of the Alma Turner Library. And welcome Rebecca and Andrew before the committee.
Through the chair, we will have Nikki Harrison joining me.
I'd just like to introduce the report and I'll hand over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to take the report as read. My understanding there were no questions prior to the delivery of this report, but if there are any questions, we welcome those now.
Can I just note, Councillor Skinner is a member of the team and just noted that he supports the recommendations and his absence today is due to a bereavement in the family, but he wanted me to note at council his strong support for the recommendations in the report. Are there any questions of colleagues? Councillor Paki is also a member of the task force. I don't know whether he or others, Councillor Stallard, wish to make any comments on the report. I would say as the chair, obviously disappointed that the issue of the trusses being found as broken was significant. If anything, for me, there were some in the community that were questioning whether there really was an issue with the library. It was only discovered as a consequence of doing the work on the ceiling tiles. My view is that the broken trusses is actually a far more serious risk to the building than was the initial oil we went to fix with respect to the tiles. If there was good news in it, the task force had been struggling to find clear answers around why the roof was leaking. When we found that the trusses had broken and the roof had dropped, then became a no-brainer as to explaining that. And I'm delighted in the report and in the proposal going forward is that the expenditure for the roof renewal and the drainage repair is included, which will also give me the confidence that that mystery and a fix is going to result in a more comprehensive repair of the library. I'm just going to take the two task force members, Councillor Courtney, and then I'll come to you. Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor. I think it's more of a statement of where we're at. It's quite easy in retrospect for us to be critical of where the project has actually arrived, and that some of the feedback that I've had is it's another mismanagement of council. But I think the team has done an exceptional job, and throughout the process of assessing what the situation was there and applying sort of an appropriate strategy to be able to solve those. I guess the bonus part that's impressive for me is the responsiveness and how quickly we've been able to attend to the new problems of the trusses. And I'll just reflect the sentiments of the Mayor that the trusses, in my opinion, as a qualified builder, presented a more serious threat than the tiles did. I also wanted to acknowledge that the disruptions that have been handled by the staff that are working within the space has been, quite remarkable. And Serena and their team has been, there hasn't been like they haven't pushed back and said, oh, this is not fair. We want this, and we're struggling. They have expressed their concerns, but they've been really, really responsible as well, and just simply coming forward and getting on with business and trying to deliver a service to the community. So I think they should be really commended by that. The team itself has given themselves enough flexibility and I guess space to be able to get this project done. And unfortunately, in the absence of an actual library facility of civic investment of significant nature, this is our best option to be able to provide a service until that happens. So big ups to the team. Respect.
Thanks, Councillor Pakipaki.
Through the chair, I'm really grateful to Councillor Pakipaki for that acknowledgement of the team, both from a buildings perspective and also the library staff who I met with just the other day. And they are very resilient, and they're very grateful for the action being taken. Thank you for your comments.
Youth Councillor Darcy Laurie.
Thank you. Through the chair, super excited to see progress on this, and I'm just wondering if there's an estimated date for when the library might be fully reopening.
I'm going to let the staff answer that one.
Through the chair, we do have a planned staged reopening of the 26th of July, which is for a bigger area than what we have now. So that will be the reason statement of the main entrance in that front part of the library. The full reopening is expected for February next year. We do have contingency for both funding and time, and our contractors and staff are working the hardest we can to do better than that February, but that's the date that we have in our work program.
Thank you. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. I think this all shows it was the right decision of council to undertake the original seismic strengthening work looking at the ceiling tiles for a number of reasons, including the large number of users and many of those who are in a very young age or of retirement age, and we do want to protect all those people in the community and provide a safe space for them. And although it's disappointing to find more experienced owners, it is a good thing to discover these problems with the trusses and that we can fix them and again maintain the integrity of the building. And I'll follow on from Councillor Pakipaki and to acknowledge council staff for their patience and the stress they must be under during this period. And it all just leads to the fact that the current building is not fit for purpose. And the sooner we crack on and get a new library community hub in the city centre and have that civic investment and have a great space for people to come for all kinds of reasons and for a great space for our staff to work in, the sooner the better, in my opinion.
The only other comment I would draw to councillors' attention is the item in 4.7. It is of concern to me that there was a historic error in the construction that allowed a building to effectively be around for several decades that was not up to code. And that is why I think our council has taken a prudent approach in commissioning a report and a review from Becca to understand if there's any learnings from that. You can't undo what's occurred, but there is a constant challenge for Mandy and her team to do best practice. And that is why, in my view, we're not just the building owner here, we're also the regulator. And we are taking that prudent approach of commissioning that report to see whether there are any learnings around process to ensure we don't have significant public buildings like libraries that are under code. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just a question in relation to the 5 to 10 year lifespan provided by this. Is obviously that's a decent range. How will that be evaluated in terms of what the actual lifespan being given to this building is?
So through the chair, all of the design that we've been working towards has been to achieve that lifespan for the building. More work could be done, but would cost a lot more for a design that would last longer than that. So we are working towards that time frame. And there will be required maintenance over that time frame as well, because it is an aging building.
Yeah, I guess where I'm seeking clarity is understanding, are we, once we've completed all of the re-strengthening works, are we getting 5? Are we getting 7? Are we getting 10 years out of this? And if we don't yet know what's going to be the process for monitoring and evaluating that, because obviously within the previous long-term plan, I don't think the new library was expected to be finished by 2028. That's 5 years from now. And so just as we start to consider those other future opportunities and where we'll be heading, understanding what time frame we've actually got to work with is key.
So through the chair, we do not have an exact number. What this tells us is that we do need to make haste in our planning for a new development.
The sort of perspective I have is that you'll never get an exact date. It's a bit like, your car when it gets aged, as at what point should I replace it? And as you get older, you get more costs. The decision is material in the extent that we have strengthened it in the task force work with it to the 34 and the 67% standard. If you were intending for it to be the library for the next 30, 40 years of this community, I don't think we would be accepting that lower level of strength. So it has influenced those decisions, but it will be we needed to provide some guidance to our engineers and our consultants. What order of magnitude were you wanting to get out of it? Did you have a further comment you'd like to make, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor Nick. So my advice from manager of the service provision would be that when you have a window of 5 to 10 years, you don't push out your final production of whatever comes next to 10 years down the track. You actually work within that 5 to 10 year window. That would be my advice around service provision.
If there are not any further questions, then I will move from the chair the recommendations. Would Councillor Pakipaki be prepared to second? Is there any debate that people wish to have on the recommendations that have come through? That being the case, I'll put those. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, say no. We now move to the next item on the agenda, and that is the long-term plan draft significant forecast assumptions. And welcome Nikki and Alish before council.
Thank you through the Mayor. So I'll just briefly introduce the report. For the long-term plan, we need to produce a set of assumptions on which that 10-year work program is based. Audit will then come and have a look to make sure that the assumptions are reasonable, that we've covered everything we should, and that we have good evidence for why these should be our assumptions. And then they will look for evidence of how we've addressed them in the long-term plan. So this is not the very final assumptions because we still have some information to come on inflation, interest rates and so on. And when that is available, we will bring that back to you for final approval as the version to go out with the long-term plan. But at this stage, it would be good to get your approval of these assumptions so that they can be used by the activity managers as they pull together their management plans for the long-term plan. So Ailish and I can take any questions. Thank you.
Complicated document. The one question I had at the front end was that on the population projections, we're currently working off the 2018 census. We've got new census data from the censuses carried out earlier this year. Could you just explain for me, Nikki, at what point do we get, and I read from Statistics New Zealand, they would expect in February next year to have the first round of population stats. What's our capacity to be able to drop that new data into the long-term plan relative to the timetable that we have to meet legislatively for it?
Yes, it will be, I think, probably not possible because we are hoping at this stage to go out to consult by end of February. My understanding of the work on the census is that it has been significantly impacted by the weather events that occurred around the time data was being collected. And again, they are having to look at alternative sources of information to supplement. So I suspect that even that February date may slip. So I think that the timing is just going to be off for us.
Can we legally, we go out for public consultation on the best data that you've been able to provide. By the time we get to the end of the process, we've got new census data. Are we allowed to input before we publish our long-term plan, the latest census data?
Yes, we can. We can update. There are always matters that come to our attention after we go out for consultation. We can use those and base the LTP on the best information available. But hopefully whatever we get from the new census is in line with what we're projecting roughly and won't require any significant change.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Stallard had some written questions through.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yes, one question and two suggested changes. So I was just wondering about the process regarding those suggested changes.
So why don't you just, I'd like to go through topic by topic. So why don't you draw us attention to the topic, ask your questions, and then I'm quite happy to take suggested amendments.
Sure. So firstly was around emissions reductions, and the existing statement, or one of the statements, was that engagement will be undertaken with the community to set targets that are both attainable and supported by the community at large. And I agree with all that entirely, but I don't think it captures what kind of ambition we should have or what the reality of the situation is from the scientific perspective and the scale and rate of changes that are needed. So I proposed that we change that wording to engagement will be undertaken with the community to set targets that are ambitious and consistent with scientific evidence regarding the reductions needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees.
Could you just help me, Councillor Stallard, on the page, we've got climate change as disasters on page 113 of our agenda. I'm just really keen to gun in on the specific words, and I'm going to take it as ask some comment from officers on the proposal, and then work systematically through each one of the changes and try and do it that way. So page 113, am I correct there?
That's correct if I can help, and it's in that last box on the lower right, and it's the second to last statement in that box.
Second to last, engagement will take, oh yeah, I've got it. And could you just read me, Councillor Stallard, the alternative wording? We've got engagement will be undertaken with the community set targets that are both attainable and supported by the community at large.
Yeah, so it's the same for the first part. Engagement will be undertaken with the community set targets that are.
Yep.
And then ambitious. and consistent with scientific evidence regarding the reductions needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees.
I don't mind the and, but I'm concerned about removing the attainable and supported by the community at large. So I think it would be good to emphasise the importance of the science. I don't mind the word ambitious. How would you feel, Aaron, if we incorporated that wording, but still kept that are both attainable and supported by the community at large? And I'm interested in other councillors' views too.
Yeah, so I think there's a really good tension of democracy, about leadership and vision and direction versus supporting what's the majority view in the community. And there are times when I would say, okay, it's a majority view, I'll go with that. And there are times where I say, I have a different view and I'm standing for office on that basis. And I always vote on that basis. And I'll be open about that. I do. I'm not sure it helps to say supported by the community at large at this stage when we go to consultation and we consider that. Attainable, to me, that word is used to limit our actions. What is attainable? And it's completely pre-COVID. Would we say, well, is it attainable to secure our health by shutting up international borders completely? Well, certainly not, but we did it. So I would prefer not to have those two. I would prefer to remove those completely at this stage.
So what I'd like to do is to work through issue by issue. So I'd now like to take comments specifically so that we can work through the issue that's been raised by Councillor Stellard. I just want to be fair, Councillor Courtney, was the question you want to raise on the same subject or a different subject?
No, more broadly.
Okay, more broadly. So let's just take comments specifically on the issue that's been raised by Councillor Stellard, and I'll take Councillor Hodgson first.
I think I'm somewhere in the middle on this, and that I think the word attainable is quite an important one, as is the word ambitious. And I think the two can go hand in hand. In terms of being supported by the community at large, again, I feel like as a council, we kind of have this dual role where we're trying to get the community to buy into what the evidence says we need to be doing, while at the same time we have to be realistic in terms of what the community will buy into. So potentially saying supported by the community at large isn't the best way to go about that. I would almost potentially say, yeah, let's omit that completely. But I would like to keep the word attainable because I want to know that we can do it. If we set the target, I want to know that we can do that, but the target should be ambitious and we should have a strategy in terms of how to achieve that target.
Can I just check with Councillor Stellard? I'm a little bit in the same space as where Councillor Hodgson is, and that is I want targets that are attainable. Can I just give you a really practical example? I've had people lob me and say, I want the Nelson City Council to reduce its emissions by 8% per year. We do a really big, challenging initiative like our electric buses service, and it's going to reduce it by 0.5% per year. And I look at Alec and I say, can you do 16 of those projects this year, please? And I can already get the steer from him that might not be attainable. Actually, delivering that bus project all on its own is very challenging. So, Councillor Stellard, we might be able to get a resolution. I understand where you come from with respect to and supported by the community at large. Ultimately, that actually applies to the whole plan, and it shouldn't be whether it's finances or other thing. That piece of wording is superfluous. I would accept your full wording if you were also able to include the words attainable that myself and Councillor Hodgson would like included.
Do you have a hard bargain?
In the spirit of compromise.
Yeah, in one sense, I'm happy with that because it's a very personal issue. What you see is attainable. So I think, wow, it isn't limited. We just need to decide we want to do it, and then it becomes attainable. But I would like to hear the thoughts.
The reason I differ slightly is that the Nelson City Council, even on Nelson emissions, doesn't control it all. Yes, we absolutely control all our 17,000 tonnes that come from the council. The degree to which we control the other 300,000 tonne of emissions is actually government has a bigger influence on that. And so that's where sometimes council needs to be careful. So can I just test yourself, Aaron, if we asked our officials to retain the word attainable, included all your other words, remove the words and supported by the community at large, would that be an acceptable compromise?
I would like to hear the views, just how ambitious my colleagues are.
Yeah, sure.
Because I'd far rather not have and I understand the practical aspect of why we say something if it's not attainable. But as I said, almost anything is attainable if we decide to. And I see that word is used by people who want to dampen down any efforts towards climate action. So I would really.
So let's hear some contributions from other colleagues as we try and come through with a set of wording people comfortable. Councillor Brand, and then Councillor Sanson, and then the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I suppose I'm more cautious about using the word ambitious. I saw the long-term plan last term was over ambitious, and it burnt our staff and it burnt out our operations, and I'm very cautious of that. I'm also aware that our independent auditor questioned the Nelson City Council on its requirements of the emissions reductions when we don't ask that. We ask more of our CCOs and other organisations than we were asking of ourselves. And how do we factor that into this assumption for the long-term plan based on what my colleague here has said? I'm very cautious that for reductions or ambitious projects or ambitiousness comes with a cost, and have we actually got the dollars and the ability to reach that ambitious if it's not obtainable? And I'm very cautious about that.
Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. I would say that I am ambitious when it comes to climate change action. So I support Councillor Stellard's proposed amendment. And I'd also reflect that some of the commentary that we had from the auditors was in regards to council not being ambitious enough when it came to its active and public transport outcomes, and that the concern was that it was difficult for them as an independent auditor to assess the real emissions reduction, that they didn't have the mechanisms really to do it. So they found, their comment was that it was difficult for them to assess actual emissions reduction. I didn't take from them that they were discouraging us from taking action on reducing emissions. So I think, this is a critical decade. We need to do what we can without putting undue pressure on the organisation, but it's about the prioritisation that we're taking, and we need to send a really strong signal as a governance table to the organisation and to our community that action on climate change is a priority.
Thank you. I'm going to take the Deputy. I'll take Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. I support Aaron's suggestion of the word ambitious. That's our role. And particularly when it comes to emissions and matters related to climate change, we must be ambitious. In fact, I'd go further and say we must lead and strive continually for the seemingly unobtainable. So as much as you might criticise the word ambitious, I think it's very appropriate. I support it.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I think this is really the heart of the discussion that we actually need to thrash out as a council, which is I'm very supportive of the changes Aaron suggested. We do have a very urgent and pressing crisis in front of us. It's less than 18 months that global emissions need to peak. That's what the world's agreed to, that global emissions will peak before 2025, 18 months. By 2030, we've agreed to a 43% reduction and net zero by 2050. And even those will still allow for untold levels of displacement and damage and harm to communities all over the world and here in Aotearoa. I mean, when we look at our sea level rise maps, we see the scale of the challenge that is going to be facing us locally. So I think anything less than ambitious is an insult to our community and to the crisis we're facing. But I also, I appreciate the need that we actually then need to deliver to it. And I think that's where the tension is between how ambitious we need to be and what we're willing to do to deliver to it. And I think that I'm actually all right with having deliverable, attainable in there, but I think it needs to be clearly recognised that what is attainable is a question of values and a question of politics and how far we're willing to go. Local government, the Act is very loose in terms of it doesn't stop us from doing that much, all things considered. We could divert, 50% of our expenditure solely into climate change and emissions reductions. Would that have untold consequences in other areas? Absolutely. But, those are the trade-offs we need to have the discussion. But I think that anything less than an ambitious target won't deliver to the agreements that we as a council have already made. We've signed up to the emissions budget. We've signed up to those the Paris Agreement, meaning that we've said that we will reduce our emissions and we committed to the development of these community-wide emissions targets. So I'm leaning towards Aaron, but I agree that whatever we do has to be deliverable. But what is deliverable is also entirely a decision for this council table as well, in terms of how much we're willing to give and how much we're willing to give up.
If I had a perspective and have attended 15 of the Conference of the Parties, was a New Zealander at the delegation when we signed the Framework Convention in 1992. The reason climate change policy has made so little progress is that everybody's been focused on setting big, ambitious targets out into the future and doing stuff all in the short term. And I express it with some strength. It is because I am worried that everybody wants to set the ambitious target and nobody wants to focus on the really hard practical work that's required to actually do that stuff. And so my very strong position is to strengthen the words as Councillor Stallahart has suggested, with ambitious, with respect to the science, but also with either the word attainable or deliverable within it, because I worry that we've had 30 years of setting targets out into the never never, and nobody has had too little focus on actually how you're going to get there. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks. Just quickly, I'm not a big fan of achievable. I'd happily replace that with disruptive, but I know that wouldn't work. I'm sorry, I think they're just words. So I kind of like action rather than words, but just supporting your view there, Aaron.
Councillor Sanson.
Would it be a possibility to use ambitious, actionable, which kind of speaks to both deliverable and also something we can actually do? I would come to Maddie's thing. It picks up both your desire for action and Maddie's desire for action as well. I'm comfortable with deliverable, attainable. Status quo to me.
Can I just get a rough indication? There are three potential words: attainable, achievable, deliverable.
Actionable.
Oh, okay. Actionable. Councillor, my difficulty is, so it would be actionable to ban all motor vehicles in Nelson. Do I think that is the right thing to do? No, I do not. My view is the disastrous economic consequences that would have and the degree to which it would stop, that is actionable, but in my view it is not achievable or attainable. Councillor Pakipaki.
Got it at last.
I'm sorry, Paul.
It's been around the room a couple of times.
Yeah.
My question was actually to Chair to Councillor Stallard. Would you consider changing the word evidence to consensus? Because as we very well know, there are particular groups out there will hijack that word scientific evidence for their own agendas. But if we are referring to a consensus, which is perpetuated, populated through the scientific community, that is a different. It is more protected, I guess, more. And I agree that, yeah, it's words, but these words are the ones that certain groups are able to manipulate to their own agendas.
Councillor Stella?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I'm okay with that. In detail, when you're in these sort of debates, people steer away from consensus because consensus doesn't actually necessarily mean that your position is correct. And it's a good idea to always go back to the evidence. So we can all look at it.
But that's where we're taking that argument away. Exactly what we've seen here today is, there is a cherry picking of evidence, and we're presented with evidence all the time, and whether or not that there's a consensus on that evidence, it's a lot safer to go down that route.
I personally am cautious of the word consensus, and let me explain why. There are portions of the climate change.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can I get Councillor Stallard to actually?
I'm sorry,
because that was the question too. There, I don't want to have a debate backwards and forwards between us. Kia ora.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my preference would be evidence, simply because then we ourselves can make a decision based on its totality.
The reason I support Councillor Stallard on the word evidence rather than consensus is that there is part of the science of which there is absolute agreement, but there are other parts around, well, how much are we going to reduce emissions into the future? That actually is debatable, because we will all have different views as to how successful China or the United States or others will be. And so I have a preference for the word evidence over the consensus. Are there any other contributions? Can I just go back to Councillor Stallard? Can I just check where people are at? I think there is agreement to remove the words and supported by the community at large. So I'm just looking around the table if I misread the meeting. The second thing is, I think there is support for Councillor Stallard's words around adding the scientific. And while there are some that are cautious of the ambitious, my view is actually the words ambitious and attainable, and the attainable word was originally our officials, in my view has got the yin and the yang. From councillors like Councillor Brand that have expressed concern of being too ambitious. My view is that by bringing those words together, the ideal would be, particularly in these big picture views, if we did have a consensus, it would be the preferred position. In my view, if the combination of those, and so would councillors be prepared to accept the retention of the word attainable alongside ambitious to get both those frames as a middle position that everybody could live with? I think that's where we're at. Do officials have guidance now? If Councillor Stallard could provide the detailed wording, and the only really difference we're moving from your own position was retention of the word attainable. All right, that's that issue resolved. Now, Councillor Courtney had a new issue around these long-term forecasting assumptions.
No, I don't think, just a question though, but Alish, the assumptions you've got here, the draft assumptions, they're not in any particular order, are they? Am I? Or are they?
They do have overarching groupings, but they're not in particular order in terms of priority, if that's...
Yes, that's what I meant, yes.
So through the chair.
So they're randomly there, they're not prioritised at all?
No.
Great.
I was concerned about the inflation expectations in the economic forecasts on page 116. I am highly doubtful that inflation will be 4.5% by the end of the year. We just had a very large 27% increase in petrol come into effect on the 1st of July. I've seen that flow through with the road user charges. What other choices might we have if we are sceptical that inflation will be 4.5 by the end of the year? I totally don't expect the Nelson City Council to have its own inflation projections, but are there? Thank goodness there's the chief executive. But I just worry that we bank on an assumption that I'm concerned. I've seen others from the Reserve Bank and also from NZIER that are higher.
So we will have an opportunity to update that when we bring this to you for sort of final agreement, once those things like interest rates and so on are through, and we will be updating inflation at that point.
Okay. Any other questions on the report and the adoption of the long-term plan significant forecasting assumptions? Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Minik. I did have another suggestion in terms of in the economic environment section. I'll just quickly try and find where that is.
Page 116.
Page 116.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, page 116, and they're on the right-hand column lower, so in lower right. So the current wording around economic forecasts, anyway, a focus on affordability, continued council investment in projects which will help reinvigorate the economy. So I did propose a change. I think that the word affordability, I was trying to tease out what that might mean. I'm thinking it might be better expressed by delivering value for money. And then the second half of the sentence, that council invests in sustainable projects that support economic well-being. And I suggest this because I think we're at a time where we're moving forward in how we think about the economy and what its end goal is. What is the purpose? You know, and in the past we've set up the rules that we can choose the rules, and we do set up the rules whenever we like about how the economy works to maximise profit, which is a good thing in itself. But there are other factors to consider. And I would like to think that we have a focus on all four well-beings in any decision we make. So it's economic, environmental, social and cultural. And I think it's important that we don't take on measures that we think might stimulate the economy at any cost. I just don't think that's a valid viewpoint today. So that's why I say sustainable projects. And that's a very general word that's open to different people's interpretation. But ultimately, I would like to think that all of our activities are sustainable and that they can continue through into the future without generating results that mean our activities can, they're no longer, well, the things we do are no longer practical or sustainable. So that the overall wording that I propose, ensure council spending delivers value for money and that council invests in sustainable projects that support economic well-being.
I have a different perspective, but that's why we have a debate chamber. The first is, I think the word affordability is absolutely crucial. We have a community out there that is struggling with costs. We've just had the report that said there's an 80% increase in the number of people who have not paid their rates on time for the last year. And I think for council to remove the word affordability is for us to say, we don't get it, that our rates bill is significant and something that, yes, I want the chief executive to get good value for money, but I also want him to understand the impact that rates bills has on households. So I'm quite not supportive of removing the word affordability. I actually think that would be out of touch with the community that we serve at a time when they're under such a significant economic pressure. The second thing is that the language around reinvigorating the economy is, and I seriously say that both Nelson and New Zealand needs to take a breath of where we're at. We've just declared a $43 billion balance of payments deficit, the worst ever on record. We had the government this week announce a $6 billion deficit. The economic pressures on this community in the period of which we are doing the forecasting is that if you maintain balance of payments deficits of that sort, we will not own our own country or our community over a long period. You'll end up as Greece. And I don't think anybody would wish that for our community. With due reference to our member of the Greek community in our infrastructure manager. But you need to look at, that was a country that said that economic growth and those things didn't matter. And they got to the point where they did not own their future and the level of hardship was enormous. The one piece I would be prepared to accept is they are happy to include sustainable before the word projects. And my view in that context, sustainable projects is not just referring from sustainable from an environment perspective, but also sustainable from an economic perspective. The reason in the climate change section, we don't make recognition of economic factors. In the economic section, we don't make reference to the environment factors because you need to look at the assumptions of the overall document as a whole as we balance the process through. So they would be my perspectives on changes to the economic environment forecasts and the assumptions we make. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks very much, Mayor Nick, through the chair. So I have very strong views on this, and I absolutely support Councillor Stallard's proposed amendments. Value for money captures both affordability, but also efficiency and effectiveness of the purchase, and it is a term that is used specifically for public sector. And so I think it's actually, I think the community deserve not just affordability, but also a focus on effectiveness and efficiency. So I absolutely support value for money. In terms of economic wellbeing, we are absolutely at a time where we need to be considering broader outcomes for our community. And I think just kind of framing wording that considers growth without considering outcomes or prosperity is an outdated view, frankly. I think it's a 20th century view. We're in the 21st century. We need to be talking about economic wellbeing. It's not new or woo-woo. There are economic wellbeing strategies by other councils in New Zealand already. So I think it's entirely appropriate that we use the word economic wellbeing. In terms of that it's not appropriate, any comments around it not being appropriate to consider sustainability alongside economics, I think it is our responsibility to be having a strategic view across what we're doing. We shouldn't be thinking in silos, and it has recognised that one of the greatest threats to economic wellbeing and prosperity is environmental degradation and climate change. So it is entirely appropriate that we be considering words like sustainability in terms of economic wellbeing and value for money. So support you, Aaron. Thanks.
I wonder if again whether there might be a compromise, and that is I'd be quite happy to add the words value for money rather than substitute them for affordability. Any other perspectives? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, a few. I mean, I think often we can play the game of how do politicians want to define words. I know, just reflecting on discussions we've had in the past for large projects, it's been described as it would, our community can't afford to not have this go ahead. Once we get into wordsmithing, I think we end up in an awkward place. I am really supportive of shifting across to the use of economic well-being. I think that it's crucial that as we look at our investments, that we're making sure that those investments are actually flowing through to have positive impacts on the people in this place. It also aligns with the wording within the Local Government Act. And you often one of the things that's highlighted is that when we talk solely about the economy outside of the context of the benefit that it is bringing to people, means you draw some very anachronistic outcomes, like the fact that our flooding, devastating impact on the people in this region, will have boosted our local economy due to the expenditure required to lift those homes back up to standard, to all of the work that we've done to protect from future flooding, all of the slip reinstatement work that we've had to do as a result. it's one of those things where I think we actually need it to be tied to what is the benefit that we are seeking for people in this region. So I'd be very supportive of the use of economic well-being. When we're talking about sustainability, I think it's a great word because it just captures so many things about making sure that when we're doing projects that they can last, no matter what consideration you're applying to it, whether it be economic, whether it be environmental. So I think that that's a useful word. Affordability versus value for money. I can understand all perspectives. I think it's probably one where no matter what, you can use that wording to justify what you want. I think they're both loose enough that it's sort of one of those ones that doesn't matter as much, whereas I think that the inclusion of sustainability is really clear and the inclusion of economic well-being really actually does provide a meaningful shift in where that focus is, and I think it's a beneficial shift.
I want to make progress. Can I suggest, as always, trying to find a compromise that reflects a range of views? Here's my proposal. A focus on affordability, value for money, and continued council investment in, add the word, sustainable projects, which will help reinvigorate the economy and improve economic well-being. I think that incorporates the range of views that I've heard around the table. Way forward? Done. Any further comments on the forecasting assumptions report that we've received? Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor. Time to be the disruptor. All right, here we go. Buckle up, baby. Right, so I've said this a number of times in our hui when we've got our reports that have come through. Anyone notice where the iwi Māori relationship component of this is? It's right at the very end, tagged on like a. Thank you very much, Councillor Courtney. High five. I'm pointing this out because this is important. If we are going to apply a lens across what we are doing, we need to prioritise some of the things that really need to have consideration before we have talked about all of these other aspects. And having another document thrown at me with the iwi Māori relationships, the very last tagged on the bottom item is just all that tells me is that we just need to have a rethink about how we're putting these sorts of documents together. And I get it, we do it every year, and it's kind of probably be the template. Just take last year's one and fill in the stuff how it's gone. Got that. Let's change that. I say we change that. One of the particular things that I noticed also within the items, sorry, I'm scrolling really fast, was the one of the relationships with iwi is the council will focus on strengthening its relationship with iwi by funding, supporting iwi capacity. But one of the only items in terms of recruitment says attracting staff who are confident in engaging with iwi Māori. What's wrong with it saying like employing Māori? Are we just going to employ people who are, confident in that space, and we get them to go and do our bidding? I think, as a partnership, we can change that somewhat, and we can have that. We have a recruiting strategy to have iwi Māori, tangata whenua, mana whenua, and iwi in our space. So there we go. There's my disruptor. I hope I haven't hurt anyone's feelings.
Can I make a suggestion? Always looking for solutions.
I'm going to do it every time if it keeps happening.
Yeah. The regulatory and the statutory stuff is rather boring and dry. Can I suggest as a solution to the point that Councillor Pakipaki, the order of those two be reversed? That would bring put the statutory and the legal assumptions at the end. Look, I am so happy to accommodate that. I just want to check with the chief executive.
I want to kind of have it at the beginning because it's important to what we're doing here. And also, you have a think about this. When iwi Māori, we throw these, they review these, they have a look at these, and they see it again. They see it tagged on at the very end. They're saying, we're saying to them, this is the least of our priorities, right at the very back.
Well,
one that we want to have with our relationship is demonstrated by us by how we actively and publicly address the issues of council.
I've suggested a compromise. I note, and look, I'm sorry, I'm not wanting to be. Yeah, there's two items. Yep. On the first, my view is the very first forecasting assumption is demographics. It is my view that we have a special responsibility to iwi, but it's also my view that this council has the duty of serving 57,000 people of all ethnicities. The number of people that affiliate at the latest census, and I don't know the 23 figures, is 1,400 of those affiliate to our local iwi. For me to put it right at the beginning is to give a level that goes from one extreme to the other, from being the last to being the first. And that is why my preference.
Mr. Chair, I don't think the number of Māori people that are here is actually qualifies them for their mana whenua status.
I'm just expressing a view as I'm expressing a view as.
So the Crown doesn't recognise iwi in terms of their number of memberships. The Crown recognises iwi as mana whenua, and that's our obligation as well.
My view is that our first obligation is to serve all of the people that make up the Nelson community, with a special obligation to those that are mana whenua.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I would ask that we don't refer to their eligibility or the validity of their membership within the community simply by saying iwi is a small number. That's happened to minorities across the board for a very, very long time. We've got to stop that.
Well, I'm just expressing my perspective. I'm here with the whatever the majority of people wish. I've suggested a compromise of reversing the legislative or regulatory changes and putting them last, so that the iwi obligations and those ambitions are there. I don't know whether you wish to accept that compromise or whether you would like to have a show of hands around the different views. I've got Councillor Stallard and Councillor Sanson. I'll take both their comments.
I just would like to support Councillor Pakipaki's request, and so just indicating support for putting iwi relationships at the front of the forecasting assumptions.
Okay, Councillor Stallard.
Thanks, Minik. Yeah, I'd like to strongly support Councillor Pakipaki's words. We've just heard his proposal discussed in terms of population count and who we are serving. I think that's not what we're looking at. This is to do with governorship and status and relationships and partnership. And for that reason, it has parallels in our old way of thinking around consultation, which is that council delivers, work on something to the end and then consult with the iwi at the end. But no, it should be right from the start and to some degree in partnership. So I'd like to support Councillor Pakipaki.
Councillor Courtney.
Minik, I'm comforted by the response I got from Elish, because that was my very concern. I didn't like the rankings, the way they were prioritised or how they were prioritised. So I'm comfortable with that, and I think our officers will be listening to the debate and all the offerings from councillors, and we'll take them on board. This is not, I've been told, prioritised in any way. So I think we've got some work to do on it.
Thank you. I've got a difficult one here. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I'm supportive of Councillor Pakipaki. I would comment though that we could have it at the top, but to be fair, it's probably this is probably the truth as far as what our actual relationship is iwi and how we prioritise this relationship. So I would like to see it at the top, but again, it's probably not an actual representation of how seriously we take this.
Trying to always.
Can I just make a comment? So the proposal from the chair is that it gets moved up to the demographic section, which is the first section that we attend to.
Yes.
Yep.
No, my suggestion was, and I understand your point about being at the end, and my original proposition on these things, I'm always trying to find solutions. I do agree a little bit with Councillor Courtney's comments in that I don't think what we're doing today in the assumptions is actually ordering priorities. There's other discussions we're going to have. But I do understand Councillor Pakipaki's point of it being at the end. Can I make a compromise, as always? You've got the demographic session first, which I think is appropriate. That's one of the most important things as to where you think the overall population going. How would you feel, Councillor Pakipaki, about the section being coming after the demographic section?
I would be happy with that.
You be happy with that?
Yes, I would.
I think we've got a solution that everybody live with. Look, I tell you one thing that I'm, these issues are really difficult, and I've seen lots of communities get really divided over this. And as much as possible as a council want to try and navigate a way through these sorts of issues in a way in which we're totally respectful of the important relationship with tangata whenua, but trying to do it in a way that is as least as divisive as possible, because I think our community is stronger for that. So I appreciate Councillor Pakipaki asked that compromise. So I'm going to ask that in terms of the order is that the section with respect to the title and the oversight of it is relationship with iwi will follow the demographic section. And I think at that point sorry? Oh, the second part is with respect to this. And I just have and it is a direct question to the Chief Executive, and that is with respect to staff. Do we not, here's the difficulty that I just want to try and tease out, Councillor Pakipaki, and please don't take offence. Under the Human Rights Act, when the council employs staff, their ethnicity must not be taken into account. That's the law. But their skills and their knowledge can be. And my worry is that if we shift from the skills that they have to their ethnicity, that we actually have a potential legal risk. And I'll be interested in the Chief Executive's perspective from that.
Can I just make a comment on that? I believe the police, New Zealand Police Service have a policy that allows them to clearly state that they have a requirement to recruit from a diverse ethnic background, including iwi Māori. It's on their website.
Yes, they do, but I think exactly the same way they do so. I have no difficulty in our council having a policy for our Chief Executive to ensure a greater diversity in your staff appointments. I don't have a difficulty with that. What I do think gets us into difficulty, and I would not want to do it without very good advice, is for us to be giving a directive to the Chief Executive around employment of staff of favouring on ethnicity grounds and not on skills.
Thank you. Through the chair. Look, diversity is extremely important to me, and we wouldn't be a successfully functioning council unless we had diversity within the organisation. So look, we do take into account when we employ people a range of factors, and making sure that we have a diverse organisation is one of those factors. But I think it is important, of course, we get the right person with the right skills. So we are always looking to get that. But if we were only getting a certain section of society, we would absolutely look at that. So as I say, as our selection panels employ people, we want to make sure we are getting a diverse group within the council. I don't think we need a specific policy to tell us what we should or shouldn't do, but diversity is a criticality.
Okay, so we'll wait for some qualified advice to.
Can I just go back and just test the exact wording, because this is one of those things that wording matters. The wording suggested changes that you wanted to make on page 122. You just want to be more specific on that and just.
I'd be happy to wait to Mr. Mayor to get some advice on that. On what our obligations are, what we're allowed to actually say. That's what I'd like, but what I like doesn't always have to.
Councillor Sensen and the Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much. I recall last time when we had a conversation around pay equity and equitable outcomes, we very helpfully the public service had some guidance. They have guidance on how you can meet diversity and inclusion commitments. So maybe there's something in there. Like I know a lot of organisations have policies around diversity and inclusion. I would hope that we have one. So I would actually be interested to know if we have a diversity and inclusion policy. And if we don't, maybe we could, maybe we could just get an update on that.
Can I just pick up on Councillor Pakipaki's comment in this regard, and your contribution, Councillor Sansom, is these are the forecasting assumptions for our long-term plan. And I think what Councillor Pakipaki has inquired as to what's our policy around diversity and within our staffing. And I think the best way to take this one forward would be to take it, as Councillor Pakipaki suggested, offline, but for the Chief Executive to come back and just report on what's our policy around improving diversity and what is specifically about improving our capacity within the organisation around Te Reo, tikanga Māori, and those issues. And for the chief executive with our human resources managers to come back on that point. Is that a way forward to the satisfaction of my two council colleagues? Good.
Oh, well, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good path forward.
And I think that the last bit is what we're keen to understand is in our human resources policy, what have we got in that space? And is it strong enough relative to the ambitions that Councillor Pakipaki and Sanson have? Councillor Stella.
Thanks. Are we moving on to any additional points? Or did
I'd just like to, that's right. Can I just, Councillor Pakipaki, have we dealt with the two issues satisfactory to you? Other issues?
No.
I'm sorry.
Just wanting to clarify in terms of, I think there's been some really important things raised. Obviously, in front of us is the draft, the assumptions that we're going into. In terms of the mitigations, will those be fully further fleshed out through the long-term plan process as we make decisions that relate to the draft assumptions in the document?
Through the chair, that's correct. So as we have the workshops on what's included, we need to take account of the mitigations we said we're going to take and make sure that they are funded.
But I guess my question is, as we develop AMPs and are considering the issues raised in the forecasting assumptions, I'm presumably further discussion will occur on what mitigation looks like. And so between this point and the final sign-off of the LTP, as those AMPs are fleshed out and developed, will further mitigation options be pulled out of those should they arise in a given area?
Through the chair, the assumptions will need to be nailed down at some point before we go out to consult, although you could vary them afterwards. Normally that is the point at which you would have them completed.
And when you're saying the assumptions, you're also including the mitigations?
Yes, everything in that table.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, last point, and it is my ambition to try and complete the public agenda by 1 o'clock. And so I now would like to try and move to wrap this item up. Councillor Stella, do you have a further point?
Thanks, Minna. Yes, when I look through this table, I guess my position is that if something is not on the table, then we consider that's not a risk, that it will sort of continue as it is today. And to my mind, the whole landscape around energy is something that has substantial uncertainties and risks going into the future. And I guess when I see that energy is not on the in the table, I guess our thinking is that it will continue to be abundant and affordable, that word again, throughout the next 10 years. So I believe it should be something we're looking at for a number of reasons. Firstly, the sort of sole tool that we have to reduce emissions is the emissions trading scheme. And the workings of that is a pricing, basically. We're going to make it more expensive and then you'll use less. So surely already there's a signal that energy prices are going to increase substantially over the next decade. Added to that, geopolitical factors, as we've seen in, through Ukraine and Europe, it's getting harder to extract fossil fuels and more expensive. And that's what we call energy return on energy investment. And that leads to a sort of a cliff where everything seems to be going okay. And then you approach the edge of a cliff and you get massive price increases and reduced supply. And also the difficulties in managing a transition away from fossil fuels. So I did send this point through to Officer McDonald, and thank you for your response and to the other questions. Personally, I would like to see a section on energy in there now. I'd be interested to hear the views of my colleagues around the table. And Officer McDonald did state that we would need to be able to demonstrate to audit what action is proposed and evidence for what might happen in the future. And I believe it's not too difficult to get that evidence and forecasts around energy and the risks and so on. But I'll leave it there and just be interested to hear any other comment about that.
The perspective I would have on energy is I am more optimistic than you, Councillor Stallard, about, you're right, as you put the screws on fossil fuels, we've got to find the energy from other means, otherwise the price will go up. I am more optimistic than you are about those alternatives. So if I take the wind sector, for instance, it is able to, in my view, be a very substantive substitute, and solar and others. The second point in terms of council's responsibilities, and I do think we need to stick to our knitting, and that is that we are not major players in the energy sector. The key element in our long-term economic forecasting will be how it contributes to the item of inflation and our costs coming in. That is, we buy electricity, for our swimming pools and our other facilities. And so I'm expecting the council in its economic forecasting of inflation out over the next 10 years as part of that section to include it. Now, I'd be quite comfortable in the economic forecast section, because that's where the rubber hits the road for us to make some reference in the economic forecast in the inflation, including what impacts fossil fuel, or what impacts economic costs will have on inflation, because that's where we'll hit it, just exactly the same way earlier in the meeting. I referred to the fact that the 28 cents increase in the price of gas on the 1st of July is going to impact straight into that inflation figure. I'd be interested in other views. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Munich, through the chair. Yeah, I just want to really acknowledge Councillor Stallard for, I guess, continuing to, push the envelope out on what we should be considering. I think I agree with you that it is absolutely a valid risk that we should be considering through our long-term plan assumptions. This is a 10-year window. And whilst we are transitioning to renewable energy, we're not there yet. We're still using coal in New Zealand. Population's growing. We're not really tackling the reduction of energy use in any major way, which from the reading I've done on climate change, it is one of the actions that we're going to have to take, or one of the mitigations. So I think it's, thanks for raising it, Councillor Stallard, and I would support its inclusion.
Nikki, what's your perspective?
Could I just make a point, which is not to the merits of including energy as an assumption or not, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear. This is a list, first of all, of the significant assumptions, which will really drive the shape of the AMP. There are many lower level assumptions which do not make it here because they're not going to be so significant in terms of dollars and what is included. And also, it's not a list of risks. So where we have the risk column, that is the risk of us making the wrong assumption, not the fact that this is a risk, if you see what I mean.
I understand completely. Does that help provide some clarity?
Yeah, thanks. I'll just say a few more things. There are challenges in transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. One of them, which we're already seeing, is that we are developing renewables at a record pace and our emissions are increasing. That's because we're growing the economy globally at a faster rate than we're producing renewables. So it's not replacing fossil fuels at the moment. It's just adding to our total energy budget. So we're actually making no progress. Second thing, so the energy is renewable, the infrastructure is not. So that's a key point. The day when renewable energy is used to make the infrastructure for renewable energy systems will be very interesting, but I'm not sure when that day will arrive, perhaps never. And I do think it's important, and thank you for the distinction between assumptions and risks. If we have that kind of lens of energy, it will influence our decisions around transport and where we build and what our requirements are and our ambitions on solar and so on. So, I guess the next long-term plan is 3 years from now. And perhaps it's enough just to flag it now. And that from my perspective, it's really front of mind, and the whole energy situation will change how we do things and how we think about things this next 10 years for a long-term plan. I do think it's inadequate, and I'm not saying we're actually doing this, but if we take the mindset that energy landscape pricing and availability will continue as it is today over the next 10 years, then we'll be in for some serious problems arising. But I'm happy to leave it at that and revisit it when we're all on council next term. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think that brings to a conclusion the discussion on the draft significant forecasting assumptions report. We've got a recommendation there to approve the amended draft significant forecasting because we have made a number of amendments. Is a colleague prepared to move the adoption? Thank you, Councillor Sanson. Seconded, Councillor Courtney. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I invite Alec Lavertis, our infrastructure manager, to come for us on the August extreme weather report and the quarterly update.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. First of all, there are no changes to the report. We are currently in a new financial year, and it seems that it's sneaked up on us very, very quickly, and we're really into our work ready for this financial year. You'll see that my report also covers the May event, which I think was significant, even though civil defence emergency wasn't declared, but certainly had staff mobilised, and there was quite a bit of damage from that event. I will take the report as read. The report also asks for retrospective approval for unbudgeted expenditure of a further 8.9 million, which brings the estimate to forecast of 21.5 million compared to the forecast of 20 million. And that is as per the council resolution.
Can we just clarify that figure? The resolution we've got before us is 8.2. You said 8.9. Has there been a change? Or just let us slip?
Oh, 8.2. Sorry, if I said 8.9, 8.2.
8.2. Thank you.
And then I've also asked for unbudgeted expenditure to cover for the May event for a total of 1.42 million, and I give a breakdown of that in the report. It was simply an event that happened at the end of the financial year, caused substantial damage, and it was in addition to the August event. Other than that, the recovery is going well. We're into our stride. The work is well planned for this financial year. And I'll leave it at that, Nick. Happy to answer any questions.
Can I also acknowledge the two other members of the task force, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Brand, who are meeting regularly and keeping on top of this complex work. I would like to publicly note 5.6, a very generous donation of $10,000 from the Top of the South Community Foundation. I think we underestimate that most of Nelson has moved on from last August storm event. But for the property owners that are still red stickered and many that have still very substantive insurance claims, it is still a very difficult time for them, and that is of help. There'd be one extra item I would like to add to the report. I chose to write to the Earthquake and Commission earlier in June in respect of the substantive report that's been commissioned on the Tahunanui slump. I remind the council that the Tahunanui slump is the largest urban landslide in the country and is a significant challenge. The reason for my letter was that there were delays in the production of their comprehensive report, and so wrote, as a consequence of some frustration from property owners, that a report that we'd originally indicated would be completed in May was in April had still not been. I have been advised by EQC that that report will be provided to the council next Wednesday, the 12th of July, and that it is council's intention to publicly release that report on Monday, the 17th of July. It's important for council staff. It's a very technical report. It's a very large report, to get time to be able to properly sit down with EQC and the technical experts so that when we release it, we can also explain to the public what the implications are for those property owners on the Tahunanui slump. So I just wanted to add that extra information for councillors' information. Did Councillor Brand or Anderson, part of the task force, wish to add any comment before I ask others who've been working on this. Ryan? Okay.
I'd just like to comment, Mayor Nick, that the Te Whanganui slump, the meeting that was held with those residents and the presentation and the information provided by the team, including Marcus from Toppin and Taylor, really emphasised how important the work that has been happening continues, and that the needs have been covered really well by this team, and that the work that Alec has counts. Yeah, Alex is fine. Okay, sorry, I was like, oh, that's disrespectful. Has presented, and the team have worked really well to ensure that we are progressing to meet the needs of these community members that haven't moved on.
From my perspective, it's a really good report, but man, this council cannot underestimate how challenging this work is going to be on an ongoing basis. And we're a long way out from being out of the woods and getting all of these issues resolved. Any other questions? Councillor Courtney.
Through you, Mayor Nick, to our General Manager, Alec. When I asked this question some time ago about learnings, I just want to know, are there continuing to be learnings from this severe flooding event from August last year? You said to me in answer to that question some time ago that the navigators should have started earlier. That was one big learning that you've shared, and you've shared it wider than just Nelson. Have there been any others that have come out of it so far? I'm believing that out of bad comes good, you see, and I'm wanting to see that we all benefit from this experience that we're having.
Through Mayor Nick, so certainly I stand by my my view that we should have engaged the navigators a lot earlier, but that's something that we need to discuss with civil defence more than anything else. In terms of our infrastructure, there's always learnings from any event, from the August event, from the May event. We are understanding our key choke points, if I can put it that way, and we know what we need to address. There's always learnings though, and no matter what we do following each and every event, there will be new challenges from a new storm event that we are posed with. But certainly we understand our network. The navigators are a separate issue. Yep.
Are you optimistic through you about when this maybe come to a finality? Is it too early to ask that?
Oh no, I think we're still on track, and as I said, we're in a new financial year now, so we've closed off last financial year. We're focusing on what we need to do now. We're aware of the priorities for this financial year. This is still going to be about a 5 or 6 year work ahead of us, and that hasn't changed. As we get into our work, bearing in mind that a lot of the stuff was based on estimates, as we start ticking these items off and getting to completion, we'll know the exact the state of those and what they actually cost. And as per everything, we'll be revising those budgets, looking at what we need, addressing that through the LTP. But at this stage, we still got that window. I don't think we can squeeze that window any shorter. We still got that 5 to 6 year window, 5 years in the current financial year, but that status remains the same. But look, there's a lot of work happening out there, and I'm very, very hopeful, and I'm encouraged in terms of the pace that we're moving at.
Right.
The single greatest challenge going forward that has significant financial risk for council is those land slips that are private to private. So I think Alec and his team have done a particularly good job on the 18 landslides. The work's not done, but from a policy point of view, I think we're in really good shape where we've got council landslides onto private land. The tough one ahead of us is where we've got landslides from private land to private land. And I've recently had some corresponded with the government that has made some announcements about the support that they have provided for the communities like Gisborne, Coromandel and Northland in that regard, to try and get some clarity as to what support they may be able to provide for us with Nelson residents affected by that difficulty. All right. I'm happy to move the adoption of the report. Is there a colleague that's prepared to second the report? Thanks, Councillor Brand. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, say no. We now move to the appointment of commissioners for the Nelson Airport Notice of Requirement on Plan Change 30. And welcome Mandy to the table to speak to her report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a brief report and I'm happy to answer any questions.
It is a significant decision of council to decide to appoint commissioners. But from my perspective, when we are a 50% shareholder in the airport company, I think it becomes really the only viable path, and Mandy's report makes that pretty clear. This will be a big and challenging resource consent for the council to process. So councillors are clear. The commissioners will hear all of the recommendations. They will then come back with a recommendation to council, albeit one of the very unusual features of the Resource Management Act is that on the notice of requirement, the final decision on that is actually made by the airport company itself. Is there, Councillor Stella?
Thanks, Mayor. I wonder if you could just briefly explain in that case the distinction between the notice of requirement, what's covered there, as opposed to the plan change request that is decided by council, with the former being decided by the airport themselves.
I'm going to ask Mandy to have a crack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the notice of requirement is for the designation. So requiring authorities such as the airport, such as council, such as Network Tasman, for example, they are able to have designations that essentially trump the planning rules when it comes to the district planning rules, not the regional rules. So the designation very clearly sets out for the airport. It's an airport and we do airport stuff within this designated area. The plan change is for the planning rules that are underneath that layer. And the two need to be changed in order for them to do what they want. Before extending the runway, they're essentially changing the planning rules in that new area and extending the designation over that new area.
To provide a bit more clarity, council gets to make the final decision on the recommendations on the changes to our plan. The airport company, as a requiring authority, gets to make the final decision on the notice of requirement. The significance of the notice of requirement is that it triggers the Public Works Act, by which the airport company can compulsorily acquire private land. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. As there is an assumption that council takes on the advice of the independent commissioners, I'm assuming that the same assumption applies to the airport. It would be irregular for the commissioners to give guidance in one direction and for the airport then to kind of ignore that and go in another direction, I'm assuming, maybe.
I'd be interested in Mandy's comments on that. I'm certainly familiar with the court decisions about council is very limited in the degree to which we can change the decisions of the commissioners in respect of the plan change. I would be interested in advice exactly as Councillor Sanson has asked, and that was, to what degree can the requiring authority shift from the recommendation of the commissioners on the notice of requirement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So they absolutely can decide not to accept the recommendations of the commissioner in regards the notice of requirement, the designated area. I have seen this done a little, but not often. And where it's done a little is just because the finer details with the operations that perhaps weren't fully appreciated through the process. So there's usually reasons that are provided by the requiring authority if they change from the recommendations put to them.
Mandy, I'm always keen to understand more about this. And I wonder whether it would be possible for you to provide a written note for all councillors on this. And essentially, it's a tough question. And it's not one I think that you can give immediately, but just to flesh out that question from Councillor Sansom. And essentially the question is this: is the limitations on the requiring authority about varying a decision of independent commissioners substantially different to the constraints that exist on council on the plan change?
Happy to provide that advice, but
I think it's also is that there's a high level of public interest, and for us to be able to provide clarity for the community on that point would also be helpful. Councillor Sansom?
And I think I'm just raising it because because of the high level of public interest, I think that if the commissioners give one recommendation and then the airport were not to follow that, it would be an interesting situation.
Well, the other reason that's important, and I'm interested, is that the government is going through a process of rewriting these laws. These provisions about these powers of requiring authorities are quite controversial, and it would be good for us to understand them as well as possible, because if we genuinely think in response to our community that those laws are inappropriate, we can be an advocate for change if we wished. So if you'd be able to do a bit of a note on that rather than trying to expect Mandy, I know it's a highly complex area of law, and it'll be good to get a note that you may need to get some legal advice before you provide it to councillors.
Yeah, happy to do that. But in summary, the requiring authority is the final decision maker. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor? Sorry, the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, kia ora, Mandy. Just wanting some further advice in terms of the function and the recommendation as to hear and recommend as opposed to hear and decide, particularly in the context of us having that shareholding and the decision potentially having direct financial implications for council itself.
Yeah, so through the chair, so yes, there is the option of having the independent commissioners to hear and recommend, or to hear and decide. The hear and decide would be advisable if the council took or wanted to make a submission on the proposal. I understand council is not going to do that. So in this case, to hear and recommend still avoids that conflict by the council not having heard and being a part of the hearing process.
And what is the benefits in that approach?
So through the chair, the benefits in that approach is that council is taking a leadership role, and that it is seen as somebody as having oversight of this process rather than just completely having hands off. You could argue that's a benefit the other way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final question would just be, under the RMA and with the legal limitations on what a council can decide outside of a hearings panel recommendation, do we have oversight? As in the elected body?
It would be unusual for the elected body to do anything different to what is recommended by the independent commissioners, given that they weren't a party to the proceedings. But it's still, it's still a completely reasonable part for council to take part in that manner under the RMA.
I strongly support the recommendations. My view is that the decision about the future of the airport is actually a really critical one for our region, and that it is proper even though that it is quite constrained for the decision to be made by council. The only part that I will caution is that as a consequence of that, councillors, as we go through the process of the commissioner hearing, need to be quite careful of not taking a very fixed position. It's not a difficulty talking about the issue and the number of issues that are there, but if you take a fixed position on it, then when the recommendations from the commissioners come back to council, then I will need to exclude you from the decision on the commissioner's recommendations. So as this debate goes on in the community, councillors just need to be aware of that if we adopt these recommendations. All right, I'm happy. Oh, sorry, you have a further point?
Yeah, I guess I'm just still musing on that point in terms of I agree that this is a significant regional development in any case, no matter the decision, and just noting that we do receive, we are invested in the decision. I think that there's no question is that through this process we'll receive significant community feedback, but there's also the implications of, you know, what will happen to our dividend, what this investment looks like, that as shareholders we're vested into. And I'm still just musing on whether actually our best role to provide leadership in the community is actually to step away from retaining a rubber stamping role and to actually engage in the discussion process, or to just do the first part of that and actually say realistically there will always be, I think, some degree of perception that council has an interest in this item by the nature of the circumstances around it, and whether it's therefore best just to hand it across, even if we were to say stay silent through the submissions process.
The only piece I would add to that is in central government, you have this dilemma all the time.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when I appointed the boards of inquiry for either the major roading projects like Transmission Gully or Waterview, we were both the owner of Whakakatahi as well as making a decision on it. And equally so with respect to the major energy companies, where the government's a big shareholder in those businesses. The one bit I would constrain it on is that when we come, and I think councillors are capable of doing this, is that when the decision comes back to us, it is my view is that we need to make a decision on the basis of good planning and good resource management, and that we should, in our minds, set aside our interests, our commercial interests, as a 50% owner in the airport. And so when we come to that decision, my view is, as a council, in considering the decision or recommendations from the commissioners, we should say, actually, the fact that we are shareholders should not influence our decision on what is the right thing for the community as the guardians of our district plan in the area. That would be my advice. I'm going to move from the chair the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 with respect to the appointment of commissioners for the airport. Is there somebody that's prepared to second that? Councillor Rollo? It's now open to debate. Did you have your hand up earlier that I missed? No, you're fine. There doesn't seem to be any wishes to debate it further, so I'm going to put the resolutions. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. That completes the formal public items of business. I'm now going to move the exclusion for this afternoon's agenda. My intention is just to simply take the resolution for us to go into committee and then to take our lunch break. The agenda sets out the matters that are justified for public exclusion, and someone prepared to move that. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I took it from the nod I had from Councillor Courtney. He is happy to second. Is there any debate on item 12 of the agenda and the reasons? That being the case, I'll put those resolutions, excluding the public and the set out. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. That is carried. Council is adjourned.